Welcome to the Sharpe Way show. So happy to have you with me this evening. And, I'm so happy that you decided to stop by here. It's a little bit past 7 p.m. on the East Coast. I want to talk about something that I have talked about many times, usually on my radio show. For those of you who listen to my radio show every Tuesday at 1 p.m., I very often talk about New York City, how we can make it better, things we can do better, all those types of things. But I rarely have someone else to talk about, right? Usually I'm just me yapping to you guys and we go back and forth. Today I brought somebody who I think cares about urban issues as much as I do. I think he absolutely does. He's been on our show before, so he's returning champion. He is a content creator. He covers politics, pop culture. He is Dan from the internet. How are you, sir?
Great to be with you, Larry. Good to see all of y'all in the audience. Let's go.
There we go. We are back again. And I guess the reason, you agreed to have this conversation because we've talked in the past and it seemed like every time we were talking, there was something else getting in the way. So I said, let's just have a conversation here. I think a better way of doing things. And so if you want to follow Dan, by the way, you can follow him either on Twitter at Dan from the web, or you can go to his YouTube channel, youtube.com/Dan from the internet. Two separate things. So tell me, why did you care? Why was this a thing for you?
Well, yeah. First, I'll say thank you for graciously having me on your show as many times as you have. I've been on several different panels that I think the Sharpe Club, as you have it, and all those have been really great experiences. Great folks on there. So I definitely don't feel like there was like something was getting in the way. Of course, you have more people on a conversation. There's more voices, so you want to hear that. So definitely not in that sort of context. But when you invited me on, you're sort of thinking about, okay, what kind of topics are there that we can discuss? And, I think there's, on my stream Power Report, we usually cover once or twice a week just the biggest news stories of the week that will be the most consequential for, history looking back on this moment. And by ranking news in that way, sometimes you miss the stories that are kind of bubbling under the surface that we all kind of feel oftentimes more latently than, big force and foreign policy issues. I think,
100%.
The situation in Gaza, the situation in Ukraine, the situation in the South China Sea. These are all things that for people who pay a lot of attention to politics and how this can have a large ramification internationally, we're thinking about these things all the time and have been thinking about them very acutely for the past several months, especially. But on a day-to-day basis, I don't walk out of my door into, thankfully Gaza or Ukraine or Taiwan, right? Like I walk out of my door and I walk into a community, a city. There's a lot of things.
You're a coastal guy, right? You do LA and New York. Is that right? Do I remember that right?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. So there's that experience. I've lived in a number of different places, mostly cities, but I've lived in a number of different places across the country and a little bit internationally. And I think that these are the issues, the meat and potatoes issues, cost of living, crime, poverty, homelessness. These are the things that we are experiencing 100%. On a day-to-day basis, but we only because we're talking about like high level politics and who's running for president or whatever. Those conversations get lost, even though we all know that's what we all want to talk about. And so I think that's a great opportunity.
Let me go deeper on this. I think there's a bigger issue here. I think sometimes people purposely push the bigger issues to shut down the conversation of the other issues and to make politics not local on purpose, but instead about rather who's in the White House, right? So if I'm a terrible city council member or I'm a terrible, county executive, I just go, but Trump or Biden, see, you got to still vote me in because other guy bad, even though I'm terrible at what I do. I would argue they even go further than what you just said. They purposely do it.
Yeah, I think, you might be able to find anecdotal situations here and there. And in these conversations, I always wanted to separate between Democrats and Republicans as elected politicians, elected figures, etc., and people who identify with the Democratic or the Republican Party as far as who they vote for, which is, you know,
Yeah.
especially as we know in this context of
Yeah.
the show, maybe I choose to vote for a candidate because these are two options. And I'm not even talking on the national level, but on the local level. Maybe there's
Right.
only two options, or maybe there's two options that are both Democrats, they're both Republicans, and you're really looking at policy to tell the difference. Being a third party voter, we're in that boat all the time. But yeah, I think that I think it's most popular in spaces of political debate and discourse, like, you know, the
Yep.
things are going on in a lot of major sports right now. I treat a lot of political discourse in a similar way. We're talking about sports. We're trying to make
Mm,
numbers and analysis of what's really going on. And the easiest to do that out of is national politics, because whatever's going on in, you know, Duluth, Minnesota on the
right.
school board there, I'm sure is riveting and fascinating. It always is when you dig down into these things. But as someone who spends most of his time either Los Angeles or New York City, that's just not something I'm going to be able to sink my teeth into. Whereas national politics, even some bigger state level politics, you know, I know of Ron DeSantis in Florida and Greg Abbott in Texas. There's a lot of
Right.
people know about Gavin Newsom in California. We can start to, you know, build some common avenue for what it really often boils down to is entertainment. So then it gets to team sports, and like you're talking about,
Yep.
people will point to the national thing. But I think there's last thing on that. There's also factors in economics and social media that cycle
Mhm.
these big national news stories to the top of our attention, and
Of
unfortunately
course.
bury those as well. So it's a little bit of people with ulterior motives and a lot of systems built by people with ulterior motives, I guess I could say.
No, I think you're right. I think the average person falls into the system not knowing they're falling into the system, right? Because it's done behind the scenes. They don't know they're even part of the system. They think, no, I'm doing the right thing that my people told me was right. Meanwhile, the people who told you were bots written by somebody, right? So those are the people who told you the right thing. It's true. So we're talking about cities then, urban America, which I think most people know that more and more Americans prior to the lockdowns were really moving into cities. Still now, but nowhere near as fast, right? Cities have been losing a bit here or there, depending on the city, but the rush to the city has changed tremendously. But for a while, it was almost 50% of people who lived either in an urban area or, you know, directly adjacent to an urban area. It's a big deal. And most of the cities still run our politics, right? A state is red or blue, not because the state is red or blue. The state's red or blue because they have enough of an urban population to make it blue, right? But all states are just basically painted red. And then do they have enough blue splotches in them in urban areas to turn them blue? New York City is a perfect example. Like California too, right? New York
Yeah.
and California, same. They're red states with blue splotches, and the blue splotches are so big that they become blue states.
Very dense. So tiny blue splotches, but a lot
Right.
of, you know, ink in those splotches, to continue the analogy. Yes, of course.
Absolutely. So I feel like this is my view, and you tell me if I'm wrong on this. I feel like, generally speaking, because cities are a melting pot of people when it comes to culture, race, religious background, even the number of people who are there, their time they're there, right? Whether they're there for 3 weeks or 30 years, all those things, I think, makes people feel like there aren't clear rules, right? If we all live in the same town or city or have the same religion or same background, we feel like we have similar rules. But when we don't do that, don't know our neighbors, whatever, we feel like we don't have enough rules, and we often beg for a referee. And that referee is, generally speaking, some form of government, right? Whether it's the cop who we call, or the judge we go to, or the laws we ask for, we tend to ask for some form of referee. And we live on top of each other, right? There are more people in 1 square mile of Manhattan than are in some counties in an entire county. So I think that's why we tend to move more towards collective thinking. I think we move more towards government intervention voluntarily, like we want government intervention. I think we move more towards it because of that. But when you go out into the more rural areas, you don't have that. They don't really want that. They're okay. Leave me alone. I don't need any of that stuff. Am I wrong here?
No, I think you're pointing out a lot of things that are like make a lot of sense here as well. I want to break down things that, you know, are loaded terms, not like you're using them in this way, but, you know, as I've been thinking about this discourse a lot, and unfortunately not getting able to get it out on the show, I've been thinking about it. So first is like city versus suburb versus rural.
Mm-hmm.
I really like the framework from this book of Exurbian Now by David Meschiatra, I believe. But it's called
Okay.
Exerbia Now, the Battle for American Democracy. And it kind of describes how, we have cities, then traditionally around those cities, you have suburbs, suburban areas. So those areas, especially right now, we used to think of those as being, smaller in population, a little
Right.
more commercial, but as these cities have grown, as people have started to be priced out of these cities, they've wanted a different life. These
Right.
suburban areas have become, extensions of this broader
100%.
urban sort of sprawl. And so you
Yep.
have rural areas that are now starting to take on that role of suburbs used to be. And then you have exurbs, which I think are what a lot of us think of rural areas, little towns along state or, US highways with maybe 10 to
And
100 people.
those are dying.
Oh yeah, those are for, again, a lot of systemic reasons there. And
Yes.
so I think that, look, I'm not one of those folks who believes that um we should be trying to optimize towards 15-minute cities and we should all be living
Mhm.
on top of each other.
That
I
is one
think that's
answer.
yeah, I think that's, and again, that's a loaded phrase too. I Because people are now assuming like 15-minute cities is this like conspiracy theory thing, but I think that's for a lot of people. A lot of people will like that convenience. I'll tell you, I enjoy that convenience whenever I'm in Brooklyn or in Manhattan when I'm over
Mhm.
there. But that's not going to
No,
work
I
for
live in
everyone.
Queens and I walk everywhere, right? I live in
Yeah,
Astoria. I walk everywhere. Yep.
yeah. Queens is lovely. I'm gonna have
Yeah.
some maybe questions for you off air about Queens in a little bit, but
Yeah.
yeah, I think that we want to ultimately try to have our cities so that regardless of your style of life, what you and your family like and enjoy and want to grow up in, you have the amenities necessary so that choosing amenities or choosing your job and your livelihood is not a factor of, oh, I want this sort of livelihood, but I can't afford to live in a city or live in a suburb, right? Like I
Ah,
think
got it.
we
Okay.
get closer to an expression of freedom when we're not making decisions of, like, where we are living because of these factors like, economic opportunity or school opportunity or healthcare opportunity. When we start to,
But is it,
yeah, leave that out a little
when
bit.
it comes now to the idea of so many people who are not going into offices anymore, right? So many are not going to offices. Now, there are some of the things you can, like retail, you got to go work retail, right? If you delivery, you got to go work delivery. So some place you got to go. Most government employees who are servicing the public have to show up in an office someplace. Most do. But there's a lot more people who don't have to show up anymore. So doesn't that by default open this up to where, I mean, I saw it at the upper echelons of New York City, right? My day job is I'm a business consultant. So one of the things that I've dealt with is a lot of people who are heavily in finance, law, tech. That's kind of my field that I've done a lot of consulting in. And a lot of people used to have to go into their office and make their money in their office. Lockdowns come, they're like, I'm going to my second home. Wealthy people, for those who don't know, if you live in New York City, wealthy people have at least two homes, one in New York City and then one someplace else, whether that's in Colorado or Jersey Shore, Long Island. They have at least two homes. That's how wealthy people in New York City roll. So these people are very wealthy. So they go to their second home and they sit there in Connecticut or wherever, and they're making the same amount of money, maybe a little bit less, but basically the same amount of money. They're like, I'm not going back into the city.
And
Why
a lot of
bother?
times because of the cost of living differences wherever they are, because the city is very expensive, even if they're
Yeah,
making a little bit less, that dollar might be going a little bit further on gas, food,
100%.
etc.
Yeah, even in clothes. I mean, if you got to show up, you got to show up looking good, right? If I'm sitting in my house, I got a nice tie shirt on, I'm wearing my pajamas on underneath, right? I got my
Yes,
flip flops
sir.
on, right? I'm not paying attention, right? So a
Yes.
whole different issue. So I think what you're saying is happening, but as it happens, I don't see cities getting better,
And so
and I
like
feel like they should, but they're not.
that is a really great entry point into what I was thinking about this. So yeah, during the pandemic, I was noticing, I stayed in a suburb of Los Angeles that I was like pretty comfortable with. And so it's not like deep within the city, but as you know, like Los Angeles is not really a city so much as a bunch of smaller suburbs with tall
Right,
buildings in them connected with a
right,
bunch of freeways, right? And
right.
so, I'm in one of those areas and I'm noticing what, look to be cities not responding quickly to the way things are changing, right? So
Right.
fewer people are going into offices, and that means you have all these abandoned office buildings. You have cities that created their infrastructure around these downtown like office crowds that
New
are
York
really
City seeing
struggling.
that
And
now.
I think San Francisco is one of the biggest examples, and I love to use that as a case study, and we can come back to that and revisit that in a number of ways because it distills a lot of these things down. San Francisco's downtown was very tailored towards finance and tech, as you're probably really aware. And so when those two places, which already, talk about that, tunnel and bridger type thing traveling into the city versus leaving. You already had most of the people working in tech or finance living in suburbs and commuting 30 minutes or an hour and a half into the city center. You have COVID bring that in, and then those people have the capital to be able to say, you know what, instead of California, let's do my second house or my main house in Aspen or in Austin or in New Mexico or Arizona, or Hawaii, some people did, or out of the country.
I know people who moved to Mexico. You're totally right. They moved to Mexico.
Mexico City is now this like, booming. You're seeing a recreation of all these other different issues you're seeing in America. It's really funny. So but back to that example of me looking in a suburb during COVID, you're seeing the political issues there because on the one hand, you can't immediately turn an office space into a livable place for people to live, right? It can make temporary housing, but as far as solving the real systemic issues of, homelessness, poverty, people who are struggling to get on their feet through addiction, you can't just do that by, gutting an office space. But
hold on.
I'll say really quickly, because I think you're going to love this. It's going to tie into what you love to talk about. It's like when you talk about like gutting an office space, it's not just, going to the Cushman and Wakefield and saying, I would like to change this. Now you're talking to a local city government about zoning.
Bingo.
And how quickly you can do zoning policy and all these other different things.
Bingo.
And so you start to realize, these things for whatever interest that be, we've zoned this to be commercial and we've zoned that to be residential. And if you want to change it, now we're going to have some meetings, and then stakeholders will, as you can locally say, I want to have this here or I don't want to have this here. You're creating a lot of gridlock and you can't do things as quickly as you want to. Multiply that 100 times over for every single city you have in a state, in the country, etc. And you start to see why these things are, not responding. Our cities are not breathing and responding as quickly as the people who are living in them.
I completely agree. And I think that the government has shown that it cannot respond quickly enough, except when it does respond, it always makes some kind of grift, right? You see it in New York City for sure. I'm sure it's in San Francisco too, but I know New York. New York has created a migrant industrial complex, a homeless industrial complex. Everything bad we're going to solve has become an industrial complex. Right now, people grift. And those same people who are, I don't know if you know the story, but the same people who are landlords in these large commercial buildings, they now have said, well, we'll house your migrants. You just have to, kind of forget about those rules you had. And they went, yeah, fine. We got to house migrants and forget about those dumb rules. So they forget the rules. And now these commercial guys are making money off of migrants. Migrants have, in New York City, virtually no rights. I mean, a little bit, but virtually no rights. Virtually no way of fighting back. So now the landlord can do whatever he wants, whatever he feels, and make money. So now there's no reason for them to make a change now. There's no reason to solve the problem. It has become, you've just made migrants a profit center. You've just made homeless a profit center. And this is what drives me crazy. The government programs constantly do this.
Well, I mean, just to be clear about it, it's government structures creating openings for private companies, just like, the private landowners that you're talking about to come in and fill in the, they can run their grift. So, whoever's in the government who's facilitating that deal gets their cut. And then they can now create this business profiting off of, like you said, migrants coming in, or I think private prisons is another great example where because of the government, there's a lot of things that prison and incarceration are essentially just catch-alls for things that society is not willing to pay for. American society specifically not willing to pay for or address. But once you throw in for-profit prisons into that, for-profit immigration detention centers, like you have an entire mess to begin with. So
but what if you change the incentive though? Hold on. What if you change the incentive? And let me give you an example. You change the incentive. You keep it for profit. You do, but you change the incentive instead, right? And you do it similar to the example I'll give across New York State. I think it happens in other states too. If you have a car and you have to get your car inspected by the government, right? You don't have to drive your car to a government facility. You can drive your car to a private gas station, right? That does this government okayed check, right? Whatever the case may be. Now, the gas station doesn't make much money on this, right? It's a flat fee. The government tells them, yeah, whatever, $80 or $20, whatever the number is, right? I've forgotten, whatever the number is, right? That number, right? But the gas station's happy because it brought you into the gas station, right? So the gas station has an advantage of having the inspection because you get to come into the gas station. Hopefully you'll buy gas there. Maybe stop by the store, whatever. Maybe if your car breaks down, you have them fix it, whatever. So there is a market incentive, but it's not to have your car broken. It still allows to provide extra better service for the person. So let me add that same model now. Instead, when migrants come to New York City, what if we had instead built an Ellis Island in the Bronx, and it is run, or maybe by two of them, build two of them in the Bronx, because the Bronx does have a lot of people who are right there, who speak many languages, who know the immigrant world, right? So two separate private companies. And if people want to go there and get their paperwork, they just go there. And how do these people make money? They're recruiting companies, right? So there's literally in the black market right now across New York State, tons of farmers who are in the black market getting their labor, tons of hoteliers in the black market getting their labor. Don't go into the black market, but instead just pay these guys. And then the migrant doesn't have to pay. The migrant goes there and then gets a job, and the recruiting company gets paid by the people who are now paying the black market. They get their papers, they can work, go off do they want. And this will be an example that this will be profitized because they make money off of it through recruiting. And it's better than what the government answer.
Yeah, I agree with you with the structure there. I think a key thing, not necessarily with libertarians broadly and socialists more broadly, but I think with myself as a leftist and how I view a lot of these things, is that you can create structures and they can be good and functional, public or private, right? Whether it's done by the government, by its for a corporation. I think the general leftist position is that the corporations are where you'll get grift and corruption from. And the libertarian position is that it's the government where you'll get grift and corruption from.
Correct.
And, I think both of us kind of meet in the middle here. I think both of us can kind of meet in the middle here and say things like power in, mismanagement is where you get corruption from. And I think that can exist in both the government and in both private corporations. I don't necessarily say that making this be run by private companies, because that's what government contractors are. They are private companies doing the government's work.
But there is an issue, though, Holt. The difference is it a monopoly or not, number one? And that's the biggest issue, right? If the government says we're going to pick one company to do X, that's a problem. If you note in my idea, there were two separate private companies that all they do is they lease the land from the government. They pay rent. That's all they do.
But then what prevents one? But when you have two private companies doing the same thing, you're inevitably going to have competition. But that competition, as in everything else, is going to beget one trying to take over the other. So do you have a structure of antitrust in place? So is the government at least to some extent? Where antitrust is like, okay, there have to be. We're not going to control how many companies there are. There can be 3 or 5 or 10, but there can't be one. And you know what? I think we should also be concerned. I'm a person who uses cell phones in the United States of America. I think we should be concerned with just the big 2 or big 3 companies, because you can still get monopoly behavior through that.
You get oligarchy. I agree. No doubt. The one thing that some people in the liberty movement disagree with the idea of antitrust. They say the markets just do whatever it wants. I do not believe when it comes to monopolies are bad. I don't like monopoly in government. I don't like monopoly in corporations. I think monopoly ensures that things go wrong. I have no problem at all with antitrust issues. And I don't think on the platform we're on now, I think the government literally screwed us over by allowing Google to buy YouTube, right? That was the worst they could have done. They allowed the largest search engine to buy the second largest search engine. But why did they do it? The government did it for a very important reason, because the government wanted to control the information. And they knew if they got that, they control all the information. That was their goal. But my point being, I agree with you when it comes to monopoly. Monopoly is a bad idea. I'm all about antitrust. Yes.
Yeah, I think, especially as someone who looks at how the government approaches technology and technology policy, I'm willing to believe that you had Google, who is trying to argue to the letter of the law that what they were doing was not a monopoly, and the government, basically because they're pro-business in a lot of different choices, was like, you won the law game, so we have decided to let this go ahead and slide. I think that if the government wanted to control information, which to the extent they do, there's systems and procedures through which we see that Google versus YouTube thing, particularly, like, I think that's a classic example, which you see consistently, of government taking the side of let the business be as big as possible, as long as you can prove to us, with a preponderance of evidence, no doubt, that's not going to be a monopoly thing. And, like, we view Google as like a
I agree,
YouTube.
but I think we should err on the opposite side. We should err on it's assumed to be a monopoly. You have to prove to me it's not. We should always err on that.
We agree, but when we're talking about the government's
Yes.
intentions, I don't think the government was like, we're going to let Google win on their case that buying YouTube will not make them a monopoly, because that way we can control all the information in one place. Because if so, Facebook existed, and then Snap existed. And there's a lot of places where the information is. So the government still goes to all those places.
But they keep allowing them to buy, so it's easier to control one or two of them. They do allow that.
They keep allowing them to buy, or that most of these, corporate buyovers are happening on such a small basis, they don't really, trigger any sort of regulatory scrutiny. And then by the time they're big enough, you have your Ubers and Lyfts. You have now your companies like OpenAI. By the way tech and innovation and business moves at that speed versus the way that the legal system moves, just like fundamentally different speeds and ways of doing things, then before there's enough lawyers in the government who understand what artificial intelligence truly is versus marketing buzzwords,
right,
these companies will already have run roughshod in the policy. So I think there's a call for broader controls over capitalism overall with the government. But I want to get specifically back to how this affects housing and people's lives on a day-to-day basis. Yes. So I think what you were kind of saying there is like, what if we have, one, two, or more entities that are building public housing and providing services for migrants? And that's kind of like what I want to see. I'm not sure if it's one public entity or multiple private entities or some pseudo public private scheme, but what we're missing right now is you have a myriad of nonprofits and public programs that we have seen over the years we've allowed them to exist, decades or so now. This is one thing that some conservatives are correct about and some libertarians are correct about, sometimes in good faith, sometimes they're not, that we give a bunch of programs to these we give a bunch of money to these like tiny homes programs. We give a bunch of money to these programs to give people off of the streets, and we do it for 10 years or so, and we look, and it's like looking at the Pentagon. It's like, well, we spent a bunch of money here, and not only does it seem like a lot of that money got blown, the money that did get spent got us things that weren't working. And by the way, you lost some money. Like some of it's just like completely unaccountable for it. And this has been happening under, conservative regimes within cities, liberal regimes within cities. So it's less of a political thing. It's more about like a power. You get a bunch of corrupt people, you don't give them a plan, but you give them a lot of money, and it ends up being, okay, well, which of my friends' companies does something vaguely like this? They get a back scratch, I get a back scratch, and we can take some photos of some tiny houses, right? But in reality, I encourage folks to get a really good perspective of this. There's the We the Unhoused podcast, and it comes from, Theo Henderson, who is unhoused and interviews all these people, and they're doing a big expose on Long Beach, a suburb of Los Angeles, and their programs like Project Turnkey, where they're turning hotels into places for the unhoused to live. And you have a system, you have a structure there, you have something that's taking empty hotels that people aren't going to because of the pandemic, people who need places to stay. It's all working together. The problem is the people being hired, the people who are leading those institutions, they either, like most people, they either care about their jobs and they want to make things happen, or they don't. They're underpaid. They don't have any sort of care for their job. That kind of intellect is not like rooted out of that place. And you have the situation where unhoused people are dying in these homeless shelters. People are not feeling safe in them. They're finding like issues.
Let me give you a market answer. Let me give you a libertarian answer on this one. See if you like this one. I'm see if I can get you on this one too. All right, see if I can. There is example of this actually succeeding, and there are two ways I think you do this. They're related, so I'm gonna go off a little bit, but I'll come back. One of the biggest issues that are affecting Americans today in general is big finance buying up housing, right? And big finance is buying up housing, not because big finance cares about housing or making people renters. It just seems to be the best a way for them to make money. So that's why they're doing it, to make money, right? That's their whole issue. Right? Oh, this is a way I can make money, and I can borrow against this debt, and I can make more money, blah, blah, blah. That's the reason why they're doing it. They don't care about the housing themselves at all. Most of them just hire real estate companies to run them anyway. They don't care. Well, what if instead we did something else? We said, okay, I tell you what you do, Mr. Big Bank. If you instead do two separate things, one for people in public housing, another for people who are unhoused. First, public housing. If you take over these public housing, or even build new ones, whatever you do, build new ones, take it over, make them all rent to own, If you do that, when you sell the property, no tax on the property, no tax on the money coming back. The money comes back, no tax. So whenever you sell this property, you pay no tax on the money you make. You just make the money. Now, I say that because rent to own, they will make less money up front. They will, because it'd be rent to own. But what it would do is it would encourage ownership for everybody there. So the rent that these people are paying, they're now beginning to own their home. It would increase ownership in these areas. These people would own their homes. It lessens the damage of any gentrification and allows them to change whatever they want. This has been done before in London and in Singapore. It worked relatively well in both areas. And now I'm encouraging private companies to build lots of rent-to-own housing. I'm encouraging them to do so. Now you might go, but Larry, they don't pay taxes. So what? They're giving houses away. I don't care. I'm paying that tax to your point, in a terrible government program that's failing, and I'm keeping people in the house. And people get mad at me and they go, but Larry, some of those people they're getting public assistance. So now public assistance is helping to pay for that rent and paying for them for their house. Yes, our option is pay people's rent forever or give them the opportunity at ownership. Allow them to own their home, to know that when they get in that home, it's theirs. They can't just be evicted. They can't be just thrown out. They could actually do it. That stuff could actually happen if you allowed them to do that. Second part, that's one part. Second part is now allow them also to do something else, which is allow nonprofits to create housing for the unhoused based upon groups of people like veterans or maybe single moms or maybe addicts or whatever is the appropriate group that is required. I don't know the details of that, whatever that group is, and allow them to run it any way they want with a couple of rules. And then it's happening already. And the rules are you can stay in that house as long as you pay 1/3 of whatever your income is. If your income is zero, 1/3 of zero is zero. If your income's $100 a month, you owe us $33. The only thing you do is pay 1/3 of your income. You're never thrown out. And if you have a problem, there are people there with private security, not cops, because many people unhoused hate the cops. They're scared of cops. So private security. Now what happens? Over time, as you get yourself back in action, you find this, and I've done already with veterans housing. The veterans who start making a lot of money, and some do make money, still stay anyway because they want to help other veterans. So they want to stay. So they stay and they start actually paying higher rent purposely because they got to pay 1/3. If you're making 30 grand, you're paying 10 grand. You're making 300 grand, you're paying 100 grand, whatever it is, right? You're paying 1/3. They stay to help out and get others out of there. This style allows for us again. And what they get is they can brand the house any way they want, like McDonald House, it could be Google House or 3M House or whatever the case may be. How about something like that? Both ideas.
So I agree with you again with some of the structures here, like, tying the amount you pay on rent to make it not just, a flat amount, but make it income based. So it's like, a percentage of your income. We could quibble with the 1/3 figure, but I agree.
Yeah, if it's not 1/3, I'm okay moving that number. Sure. I made the number at 1/3. It could be whatever. You pick the number. Yes.
Yeah. I think once again, it's a really great place to show some of the disagreements that we have on policy, because whether it's going through the nonprofit option of building houses or, the bank option of building affordable houses, it's what I am trying to do, and what it seems like you're interested in doing, is trying to cut down on the grift points, the opportunities for grifting. To me, it seems like, we already talked about like nonprofits, and, we can go on that till the cows come home. But like we were talking about banks, not only are you creating a new opportunity for like a new mortgage vehicle, not like a brand new one, but something new for these banks to do. That's a significant line of business for them, for these mortgages of people doing rent to own housing. But now you're saying that, okay, well, if these places get developed and they're done for this sort of pricing, then now we have an incentive in a collection of these, rent to own sort of buildings as an asset. That's something that can be speculated on, and that's something that can be done by these same
Yes.
people who do this to everything from the price of bread to, trading, futures in the stock market. They
Yes, but
will
now you
speculate on
can
it.
do it too, though. Like
But
now I could do
pe-
it and you
no,
could do
no,
it
but
too.
no, but the reason banks can do it is because they have 100 homes to play with. The reason we can't do it on individuals is because we can't have 100 individual houses. And like it gets to the point of like what socialists and people on the left quibble with is that since the study of capitalism from Adam Smith to even Karl Marx, when there's called moral philosophy instead of political economy in the Renaissance era from the 1600s, 1700s, etc., a fundamental feature of capitalism, not a bug, but a feature, has been landlords. The idea that you take rent on things that you own, and that becomes just an inherent part of your income, not the standard way of you work for an amount and then you trade your time, or you build something and you trade time and an object for another object or something else.
Yep.
It is, no, I am collecting rents, I am collecting debts. And
Yes.
there's an ultimate question of a structure of society of, okay, if home ownership is the massive American wealth generation vehicle that we've seen it be for individuals, okay, then who's to say that that sort of game can't be rigged by people, like these private industries who are buying up a lot of homes as speculative assets? Who's to say that they can't, by having more power to do that, just accelerate the damage? And I want to leave that point up there, but I also want to say that when we're looking at issues with vacancies in cities, a lot of that is foreign investment, a lot of that speculation,
100%.
but a lot of that is also bad policy in what kind of housing is being built where and for what prices. That has to do a lot of other with different things about this. But the case in point, the thing I have with your premise right there is that just creates more opportunities for grift, be it from a nonprofit and be it from the government, as libertarian might say, be it from big banks and big corporations and private entities and big for-profit landlords, as the left might say. I worry about those grift points, but I think that some of those incentives, like, I think housing should be a right. I think if you're going to charge for housing, it should be adjusted based off of, what you can give and what you can get. I think for people who are trying to get on their feet because they're unhoused or they are from the military, first of all, we shouldn't have a need for veterans housing. like that is a systemic issue that we should be addressing.
Yes.
But
But let me touch a couple of those pieces, if I could, that you brought. The first one is the last one you just brought up, veteran housing. I agree. I'm a veteran, and my day job I do to make money, and then I give veterans help all the time for free, all the time, because veterans are what I do. I care about my vets. I'm a Marine Corps veteran. I care. And there are literally thousands of people like me who, if we were given the opportunity, we would write checks so that we could house veterans. We would do so. The government will not allow us to. The government will make it hard and difficult, and it will not be good, and we'll be angry. I used to want to help vets through the VA. The VA was so broken and backward that I stopped doing it. I said, I'm not going to do this anymore. I left, and I had to go to your point, I had to go to nonprofits. I had to work with like the Yellow Ribbon Fund and things like that. I had to work with those guys to do it. So yes, I think if we had a better system, to your point, more people like me and others would step up. But as a secondary piece here that I think you're right. There's always points for grift. Agreed. But there are basically three options in my view when I have a Goliath. Option one is I allow the Goliath to keep winning, right? And I sort of jump on the Goliath's side, which a lot of people do, right? That's the most common thing. I'm going to jump on the side of Goliath. When he wins, I win, right? That's option one. Option two is you get another Goliath to knock that one down. But then I still got a Goliath then, right? I still got another Goliath. I swap one for the other. I swap one king for a queen for a king. That's not what I want, right? I think the best way is to create as many Davids as I possibly can so that no David ever can really take over, because I have so many Davids. So my point on creating more people with ownership is the more people who have ownership, I don't want to try to bring the high person down. That's hard and often goes to violence. I want to bring the people on the bottom up to get the cool things that people at the top get. That's what I wanted. So I want to add ownership. I think when you say landlords and land ownership and landlords and rents, I think that's a wonderful thing. I don't see a downside to that whatsoever. I wish more people had something they could use to get constant income. I wish more people thought that. The more I think that you are saying, I'm going to trade my time for dollars, I think that is an outdated method for today's world anyway. Most people are seeing less and less value in that. That's why we're having to force things like minimum wage, and because people aren't seeing value in it. They're seeing value in value, not value in time. I think you find more people thinking that way. So I'd rather have more people having homes, more people having rental stuff. I think it's even better. I mean, aren't we in a way, you and I even doing this right now, right? Even though I know neither one of us is making a fortune off of YouTube, but we are still in a way renting. We are putting our stuff out, and YouTube writes us a very small check at the end of the month and gives us something. Isn't that kind of us doing the same thing? We now own this content, and now we're renting it in a way. Isn't it the same thing?
Yes and no. And in the direct case of YouTube, right? Like, Google owns the land, and you are more than happy to get your own sort of land somewhere else. But you'll find out through, I guess we could both agree on failures of antitrust from years past, right?
Yes.
If you try to go on other pieces of land, you're on a fresh volcanic island, and you can do whatever you want to on that volcanic island. But also, if you want to, get some airports, you want to get some like reach, you want to get people to come to your island, you've got to do an amount of work that Google has already done for you by saying, look, we have YouTube, we have a place to store your like cool stuff that you'd put on your island. We have this magical algorithmic recommendation system that tries to find people who have not discovered the cool stuff on your part of the island, and we are going to get it to them. But I mean, that's all accepting that Google has won. Like, we are accepting that we are playing by Goliath's rules in order to be like little Davids, right? And even in that banking example, like, I don't want JP Morgan Chase, or let's pick like Wells Fargo or one of the smaller banks, right? We don't want those entities to now be, okay, we now know as US Bank or USAA or whatever is the new Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac. Like, that is just the bank that owns all the public houses, and so that's where all the power is. Inevitably, if you do some system like that where you are like the original like the federal like housing administration act that you got from the New Deal, right? That completely unlocked home buying for Americans, those Americans who could buy a home over time, and generally got gradually pushed out to people of color and women and more
very
folks
slowly,
like that, right?
But yes,
very slowly, and still to this point very slowly, right?
Yes,
but
absolutely.
We have still kind of bought into the idea that our economy is based on wealth generation via home ownership. And that home ownership is, it's not a form of like trading in your time, but it is in the form of like, you are buying this piece of land, you're gambling a little bit, because who knows if this piece of land becomes, a hot thing, or it just becomes, a boom in a bust town that ends up becoming a ghost town later on. You have to maintain whatever is on that land so it has some value. You have to, like, and if you choose to rent out to it, then there's the truth is, rent is not a supply and demand sort of thing, right? You have landlords who raise their rent legally or illegally, or just because they feel like it rationally or not. And oftentimes people don't have the ability to make a choice because moving is a big time commitment.
No, I agree.
A big money commitment. So there's always basically like, no matter how you
let me touch that piece if I could, right? I mean,
really, really fast. I just want to say that, like, in any situation, like, you're talking about wanting to make as many Davids as possible.
Yes.
But in order to do that, you will need some sort of Goliath. The question is, how accountable is that Goliath to the Davids? Like, is the Goliath controlling the Davids, or is the David controlling the Goliath? I think.
I don't think you're wrong in anything you said. I agree with everything you said, 100%. My issue is right now, with what we are doing now, none of this is working. And I feel like my plans, while they are not perfect, I mean, I'm very clear, not perfect, there will still be grift. I wish I could magically make, no grift. But the more people who here is my view on social and revolution in general. Revolutions go much better when you have a strong middle class and when you have hope, particularly when you have a middle class that came from the lower social classes. That is the best when you have that, because they remember where they came from, right? That's the best case scenario. If I can make that magically happen, I got the best shot of a real revolution. And that revolution does not have to be violent. I would prefer it not to be. That's my view, prefer it not to be. But as I start to get more people into an ownership mindset, and I do this because I'm biased because of what happened to me. Maybe I'm wrong, but I'm biased what happened to me. My parents came out of the South Bronx. My mom didn't even have a high school diploma. My father had a high school diploma. And we used entrepreneurship to get out of the Bronx. That's how we got out. I saw it, right? I saw we did it. I have made my bones. Why? Because I've been an entrepreneur for 20 years, right? Same thing, right? I have used entrepreneurship to get myself out. I've used ownership to move forward, right? That's what I talk about. And that's why I think, I look at when I was a kid in the Bronx. How were people making money? They were making money by having, girls used to braid hair for $1 on the street, right? On the stoop. Guys used to knock out, back there when they used to make cars out of metal back then. Guys would knock out, the dents in the cars and rebuff it and that kind of thing and make cash on the street. All that stuff's against the law now. All that stuff needs licensing now. All that stuff for our safety has supported monopolies. I feel like the way that you have to support monopolies is through government. Without government, I feel like monopolies fall. I feel like monopolies constantly use government to support them. Without government, I feel like monopolies wind up failing. That's what I think.
You don't get the trust busters in the government without, like you have trust, and you don't get trust busters without the government, right? So I feel that there are. Good point. I feel that you're not wrong, but there's a full story to this where the government sometimes inadvertently, sometimes through corrupt dealings, ends up allowing certain types of monopolies to exist. I think a government in the good hands, for example, I think one very big difference between the Biden administration and the Trump administration are appointees, and the type of people that Joe Biden is appointing are more antitrust, focused than a lot of the Trump appointees are. So like there's that point that's there. But I think where I see ownership as a symptom of the broken system, right? And people will hear that and they'll automatically go, okay, you're a communist. I'm saying, no, I'm saying that, like, listen, I want to live in a world where, like, just as you said, people can make better decisions and people can do better things when they're not wanting for their basic needs. Like, I think it is not incompatible to have a world where my ability to live in a house or anyone else's ability to live in a house is not tied with their ability to have a job, or in particular have a job that contributes a house's worth and then some to the economy, right? Because whoever's braiding hair or whoever's flipping burgers or whatever, we may have been viewed in the economy that, like, that's not worth a house or that's not worth all those other different things. I'm saying, let's not view these things in the framework of ownership and what I had and what I worked for. Let's view ownership in, like, okay, if you want to, I drive a car that I really like because I have a really interest in, like, certain types of cars. If I want to work a little bit harder and, like, do the kinds of job that allow me to own that car and pay for the licensing and all the fees and the insurance that go with it, then you know what? Bless. That's not going to change the ability that, I'm still going to want to go on the internet and talk politics, or I'm going to do what I do in my day job that I enjoy.
Is your answer then something like a UBI? Is that what you like? Everyone gets X dollars? Is that the way you would see that happening? Or in other words,
not at all. Way further. I see it.
How do we make that? How do we move from where we are now, which is nowhere near that, right, to get to that level? Is I don't know how do we do that?
So how we get there, I'm not sure, because like I think there's a lot of, we need to first figure out that we agree on where we want to go. And then how we want to get there immediately becomes a question of political will. And that's something that there's books about changing and working on. Where I want to get to is a place where, if you want to live in a city or a suburb or an exurb or a rural area, and there are a number of people like you who want to do that, there is a place for you. You'll be able to do that, whether it is just guaranteed and you just have to get on a form somewhere and they build it, or it's just a percent of your income. You do not have to worry about losing your job and losing, your ability to pay bills or your ability to pay rent or your ability to have healthcare or your ability to have food. I want all of those things to just be covered as a factor of life. And you're not going to see people going, oh, well, I guess I'm just not going to cut hair anymore. Oh, I guess I'm just not going to fix the dents out of cars anymore. No, you're going to get people who can go, hey, you know what? I enjoy braiding hair and I'm really talented at it. And people will pay me to do that. And in addition to, the relatively nice, living that I have right now, I don't have to worry about, how many heads of hair do I have to cut? Or like how many cars do I have to fix in order to do that? Because when you start having to worry about how many of the things you do with your time that you're good at in order to get there, you start to get these perverse incentives where people are like, okay, well, how can I, cut corners or do whatever in order to make ends meet because I'm
Or how
worried
can
about
I be
the house
more
and the car,
efficient? Or how can I be more efficient also?
Oh, there's also
that too, right? I mean, I think there's also the idea of having purpose in your life, having drive in your life also, right? And
oh
the
yeah,
other
but
thing is
there's
then,
definitely a difference between like having purpose and having drive because you want to do
right?
things, or not like having purpose or having drive because, oh, it just so happens that your job as an emergency medical technician, doesn't pay you enough to do that. So you didn't have to figure out, okay, how do I save lives more efficiently, or how do I leave this
Wouldn't
job?
that be solved, right? The problem you just mentioned, wouldn't that be solved by two things? One, greater unionization, right? Easier for people to unionize. So that if I'm saying, look, I'm a EMT person and I'm not prepared to work for $10 an hour, and all these people who are also qualified are not prepared. We're going to work for $25 or whatever is the amount. I don't know how much they make. Whatever that number is, we're going to say we're going to work for X, and you're going to give us health care or we're not going to work. Wouldn't unionizing, one, and then second, wouldn't co-op ownership, wouldn't worker ownership of the business solve those two problems without having to make it some way that government or centralized bureaucracy, which that's what I don't trust, that centralized bureaucracy at all, right? That's where I think you and I disagree. I don't think there's any way that you say, I want to move to X and do Y, that a centralized bureaucracy would ever do that well. I think it would be much better if we had stronger unions, more co-op, more ownership. And I think that would naturally fix itself because those people who want it would bargain as labor should bargain aggressively and forward. And I think we'd have more better answers. Am I off on this?
No, I agree with you, but as always, it's who is the Goliath at the end? Because like, who is labor going to be arguing and organizing with? Are they going to be organizing against, private companies and private interests who are
Of course.
disincentivized to work with labor, or are
Yep.
they going to be, accountable to public interests and public like structures that, are accountable not necessarily to stock shareholders, but ideally by laws? And how you do those other different things. Healthcare is a perfect example because when people talk about, oh, you can't have universal health care, it's not usually because then all the EMTs will unionize because people will think that's a good thing, right? It's not because, oh, you don't want the doctors to have more rights over their workplace because no, that's a good thing. We're worried about it, and this goes back to your licensing thing we got to earlier, because if there's all of a sudden all this demand for people wanting to use their health benefits, there's going to be long waiting lines at doctors' offices, at hospitals, and like, number one, we should not treat that we have a bunch of people who are literally dying to get healthcare right now, and the only thing holding them back is money and not being able to afford that. We should not treat the system preventing those people from getting healthcare as a good thing. Not saying you are, but like, that's one of these things where like, we look at the status quo and we need
Right.
to realize that the status quo is broken, and to fix it, you're not going to look at these status quo solutions. So what you do to fix that example is look at how you're hiring doctors. We still hire great doctors, but this is what a lot of conservatives say when we're looking at H-1B visas and how many people we're taking in from other countries and going like, look, we'll give you a great life, we'll give you a great benefits, we'll give you a great style of living where you can live in a city, and all these cities will be connected with reliable public transportation, and they will all have resources and schools, and there will be great places to live, so you can come with your skills wherever you are learning them wherever you're learning them in the world, have them here, have a good quality of applies for
libertarian
you and your
utopia,
kids.
my friend.
It's a libertarian
Libertarian
utopia, but it
utopia.
ultimately gets
That's
to
amazing.
like,
Yes.
ultimately gets to like, are you going to have a bunch of private companies control how visas work in a country?
Yes.
Or
Oh, hold
like,
on. Yes. Yes. And let me
no.
give you the reason why. Let me give the reason why.
I don't think
Because
private countries should control visa. Private companies should control visa access for companies for a lot of
if
reasons. Go
private
ahead.
companies controlled visas, if that was true, it
That'd
would
be a privacy disaster.
It would be 100 times better than it is now. Not even close. It would be so, every single one, not everyone, but probably 90% of migrants that have struggled in New York, 180,000 of them or so, 90% of them right now would be working. They'd be paying taxes, legal, working, documented. If the private companies ran it, 100% that's true. We would save tons of money in taxation. They would pay. How do I know? They're doing it now. They're fighting the government every year to get more people in all the time. Look, I work in this world. I'm telling you, if we had private companies doing this, way better than it is now. I mean, of course, there's going to be problems. Way better.
I mean, I can at least speak to private companies as far as health insurance goes. And, you know, these private health insurance companies do all the same things a universal healthcare system would do. It's just much terrible. It's just like, it's way worse. It's way slower. It's very inefficient. No one likes dealing with their insurance company. People say
Agreed.
worse things about their insurance company than they would with a publicly funded healthcare system. So,
100%.
like, I don't know specifically to the immigration point. I haven't really seen a robust enough effort. Sorry for the siren behind you. I haven't seen a robust enough effort from any, you know, corporation or a structure to be like, we are going to do a lot of the below board work of connecting migrants to jobs, of making sure they have their citizenship papers and all those other different things. Like, there's definitely handling the conveyor belt process of people coming into the country and getting them connected and getting them legally. But there's so much systemically, geopolitically connected to that
Yes,
is not going to be addressed by a company. And if it is, like, you know,
I think it totally will be. The governments fight for dumb reasons. Companies, to your point, only care about cash. Dan is a good guy out of California. I need him here in Canada. And if I get to choose that, I'm the government. I will find a way. I will get him to Canada. You can guarantee I need him. He will be there. I really believe that they have an incentive to get you there. If you're talent, they want you. And the reason why I say it is right now in New York State, literally there are guys in upstate New York right now that you go to Jose, and his name's probably Jose. And if it isn't, he calls himself Jose anyway, because this is what you know his name. You go to Jose and say, hey, I need 5 workers. One's got to speak English. And he goes, okay, we need him by Monday. Got it. You pay him. He gets you 5 workers and one speaks English and they're all undocumented. So they're doing it now in the black market. And he gave Jose a bunch of cash. Just do it legally is all I'm saying. Just document them. The private market is already doing it. The black market shows us as a work. Make the black market a non-black market.
Well, actually, again, what a lot of the black market right now is doing, okay, here's, and you know, people are pointing this out in the chat right now, is that what the black market does is, okay, we're going to connect you to this job person. We have a deal with them. By the way, labor laws don't exist. So if you're, you know, slightly underage and you technically should be doing this really important job, we're still going to make you do this anyways, which is, you know,
correct.
Let's be clear here. I don't agree with 15-year-olds doing dangerous jobs, especially in a lot of these cases in the black market where the people who are connecting them are taking their payment, they're messing with their citizenship, often taking their papers, and you're creating a dangerous situation there. So in the black market, which is, you know, technically the private sector handling things itself.
No, it is not. Pull it out of the black market. I still want courts and cops. I'm not sitting there saying I want some, I don't know, Amish utopia. That's what I'm saying. I still want courts. I'm saying pull it out of the black market, and then that would end it. They wouldn't.
I based on, I'll speak from what I have experience with, which is California's cannabis industry, and taking that from the black market to, you know, outside the black market, did a lot of different things. Some good, some bad. Here's what it didn't do.
Mostly bad.
Yeah, I'd say
yes, mostly bad. New York did the same stupid stuff. Yes.
New York did a very different thing. There's lots of nuances there, but like to make it as quick as possible, California decriminalizing and legalizing cannabis is much better than when it was criminalized. But the structure with which they did it, it's not as easy as, just decriminalize it, just legalize it, or just let private companies get in and have their fix. That doesn't solve everything. You need inevitably some sort of government structure to create guardrails. If it's not going to be, that's always the thing with libertarians. Like, who's
But you
creating
already
the guardrails?
have the
Maybe you don't have
guardrails, right?
No,
Hold on.
like,
You still have
you can't let raw
guardrails.
intention be the guardrails. You
No,
can't
no,
let
no.
raw
You, no,
intention.
no.
and
You,
incentive be
you
the
already
guardrails.
have it. And my point is, you sell things in California already. There is already a tax on those things you sell. If you commit a crime and hurt people with that thing or lie or defraud people, there are still laws that will stop you. There's still a California regulatory system when it comes to produce and plants and such. It still exists. Just let cannabis go into that area. But Larry, what about 18-year-olds? Great. There's still, I'm sure, some rules with selling alcohol to kids under 21. Make that same organization now for cannabis over 18 or whatever is the law you guys made. The guardrails already exist. We don't have to add. New York State added an Office of Cannabis Management, and it only failed. It only failed. What we did is they added so much tax on cannabis that now there's still a black market. They didn't get rid of the black market. That's the biggest problem. What you should have done is simply said, cannabis is now a plant or something like that. Put it under something else. I jokingly said regulate like onions. I said that once when I was in Western New York, because in that part of New York, we grow onions. So I was there when someone asked me, so I said, regulate like onions. But you picked the plant. I don't care. Put whatever, tomatoes, whatever's the right thing, regulate like that. And whatever systems are already there, you still have them. The systems are still, you don't have to add new ones. You would have gotten rid of the black market, and you would have actually had Obama might have been right. If you like your dealer, keep your dealer. That actually would have been able to work.
No, what you would have gotten and what you are getting right now is you just have the black market invariably competing with themselves, and the light market inevitably competing with the black market and themselves, right? You're just creating more avenues of competition, which is not making cannabis prices go down. I just had 420. It was quite expensive. It's not bringing down some of the violence you're getting from these cartels. They still see it as a money-making effort. Sure. Again, in Dan's magical solution place, which some people in the comments are, worried that what you're saying sounds like communism and fascism. Like, please read up on what those two things are. But again, in my magical world, you don't need to. The tax revenues that states are seeking to justify cannabis consumption and sales, don't tax it. Make it so the people or the government own it. Like, if you're just trying to get the revenues from that, then very clearly the government should be in the weed business. Like, very clearly the government should be getting all those revenues instead of adding it onto it. That way you can cut out all of those different, okay, you got to pay this tax over here, this tax over here, and this person over here. Huh?
You just gave it a monopoly by saying government does it. Government's a monopoly. You just made cannabis a monopoly. No. Yeah, I just want it to be a plant. If you want to grow cannabis in your backyard, grow it in your backyard. The amount of times when I was crossing the state, I had it was almost always an older white woman. I don't know why, but it was always that person. She'd walk up to me when I was at some fair, and she would say, Larry, I hope you win. And she would always whisper to me like she was some secret. And she'd say, I hope you win. I said, why? She goes, because I know you want to legalize cannabis, and I need it. I can't sleep without it. And I got to get my son to go buy it. And I'm scared that he's going to get in trouble. And that happened all the time.
And I'm happy, for those folks, that they should get to grow it and do it.
Grow in your backyard.
That doesn't change. But the fact is that right now you have people who realize that this plant is very profitable, and you have people who are going to do that in the black market, and they are going to find a way to do that and get out of the way. If you use the government's at least power to say, okay, maybe it's not going to be government owned and bought weed, go to the Department of Cannabis and you get.
That's what I'm worried about. Right? That's what I'm worried about.
But you at least regulate it to not just the regular incentive land you have right now, but you regulate to say, okay, cannabis is only done by these worker co-ops, these publicly run by the people institutions over here, so that way private businesses can't get involved. Cartels, if they are getting involved, it's like, okay, well, this isn't involved with this business. This is immediately getting shut down. And you can actually start to If the reasoning right there is for the government or for these entities to be able to take that tax money and make it go back to schools or make it go back to whatever, I would rather have, maybe in your example, you have communities who have these little like cannabis co-ops or, you know, economic co-ops.
It's fine too.
And they spend that money directly into what those communities need, what their local communities need. So if they want to use cannabis to subsidize housing, then, you know, that's that community's prerogative. But to be clear, I'm not saying
that. I like localism tremendously.
I'm not saying like, you know, there's a government weed company, just like I'm saying there shouldn't be like a government alcohol company, but you're also saying that like, hey, the government creates very strict rules over who can brew large amounts of alcohol and who can make like large amounts of food.
Yeah, but hold on.
There's structures for that. And you know,
let me give you an example here. Let me give you an example here on why I think it doesn't matter. If you just let people do it. And the example is health food stores and natural food stores. Health food stores, natural food stores are all across the country. I'm sure you've been in them before in the past. I don't know if you shop there now, but I'm sure you've been in them before in the past. Most of the things in those stores are not FDA regulated. The vast majority are not, right? But they are regulated, and they're regulated through third parties. Third parties regulate them constantly. If something goes wrong, they actually get in trouble. The FDA has killed and maimed far more Americans than every single health food store, natural store in the country since the beginning of time. Guaranteed. And so where are all the deaths from the health food company, the health food stores and the natural food stores? There aren't any. Meanwhile, they're not really regulated. Why? The market can regulate itself. People do decide to do it as long as there's some way of doing it. As long as the government provides basic ideas, you don't require a monopoly of government owning cannabis. People can just do what they want with it.
Well, I'm to be clear, I'm not talking about the government owning cannabis. I'm saying the government regulating who can own cannabis, right? Or who can buy and sell from that cannabis, right? There's definitely a different nuance to it. But in the example you would even like just pointed right there, you are like, really quickly, just to refresh me, like you were just talking about an example.
The idea that you don't have to necessarily decide who gets what. Not necessarily required in something like this. This isn't a poisonous thing that when someone touches it, they die. Or isn't that a nuclear weapon, right? It's a plant. Cannabis is what it is. So if you just said, hey guys, it's a plant, regulate like carrots or whatever is the way you regulate whatever it is. And if you want to grow a carrot in your backyard, you can. If you don't want to, you don't have to. You can buy it in a health food store. You can buy an organic carrot or you can buy a non-organic carrot, whatever you want, right?
That's right. It was the thing about health food stores.
Well, you just do it.
Like, there's a lot of things. So we can't create the dichotomy of, oh, it's either health food stores or it's just like the FDA, because the FDA makes a number of good calls on things. Also, the FDA makes a number of bad calls on things. They won't go as strong as maybe like, you know, the Mexican government will or the European government will. And that's why people go overseas and they're like, oh yeah, I took this medication. It was totally fine. It's totally fine for me. So I'm not saying like the FDA is like, you know, an end all be all for knowing whether things are good for you or not. But let's be clear. The FDA is not a comparison to the regulation of a type of commerce, in the sense that like I'm not asking for a government entity to come in and say whether or not this weed is good or bad for you. What we're trying to solve for is that cannabis is overpriced. It leads to a dangerous market when it's done below board in the underground. And when it's above ground, you have just a continuation of the issues that you would get from any business taking things over. So now you don't even have like, you know, truly grown cannabis like you used to have from collectives anymore. You have factory farms for cannabis. So you have things being turned into Delta 8 and Delta 9.
Because the government decides
of that. No,
because the government decides.
No,
if the government didn't decide and give licenses to their cronies, which is what actually happens. Most people who buy licenses are actually real estate companies. That's who's actually buying most licenses in New York State. I don't know if that's true in California, but in New York State, people buying it are real estate companies, right? Those are the people who are getting the licenses, right? So if they just let people grow, I know this because right now in New York City, there are almost 15,000 illegal weed stores in New York City. And they are just regular people who live in that area, who are just selling to people they know and love, and nobody's dying. They aren't selling to kids. That's not happening.
The other thing I'll point out here is that like the FDA, whenever they come out with like, you know, numbers and things on whoever they've killed, exactly, that comes out because they keep track. Either the cartel goes, okay, we got to make sure our quarterly who survived off of our like fentanyl laced weed or whatever and who didn't. Like, no, there's you have stories and
No,
incidents
but
of people who
the cops and the hospitals would keep track of that. That's how we know people overdose every year. They do keep track of it when they're
cops and
dead.
hospitals, cops and hospitals don't always have the best, like tracking of how people die. Like we still have videos of cops saying that like they got a little fentanyl on their pinky and then they passed out and keeled over.
Do
right?
you think? Come on, let's be real here, Dan. Do you think if New York State, as an example, and I'm sure of this, could find any data showing how people are dying of cannabis, they wouldn't show it? Of course they would. They've been saying it's dangerous and they have no data. They just say it's dangerous. If they had, they would have been screaming at them from the top of the roof. If they could find data that cannabis kills people, I guarantee you Kathy Hope will be screaming that shit every week.
This was never, first of all, this was never an argument over like the government deciding this cannabis is good for you, this cannabis is bad for you. This was never that argument. This was never me trying to say, oh, the FDA exists for some sort of like good amount of reason or not. All right. Like this is never that. I am going to say that like, while you're not getting deaths because cannabis is overall like a very,
very safe compared to others.
Yeah, comparatively very safe. Doesn't mean it is 100%. Safe, but comparatively very safe. You do, like with all drugs, get different versions of it, get different contaminations. There are people 100%. Who, in California, you have it very regulated. And whenever you have a supposedly legal lab who's found to have some sort of contamination issue, it doesn't make the news because it's still very niche, but the cannabis, blogs and industry magazines will get wind of it. That doesn't even happen on the underground market. And the people
who are getting, dude, do you not smoke?
No, to be clear of what I'm talking about with it, I'm saying people going around to look at, oh, this illegal growery isn't meeting all of its codes for how they're checking pesticides. No, that doesn't happen. All right. So yes, contaminated weed gets through that direction. I think we're talking about the same thing right there. But overall, like what this one annoying thing about this conversation, not necessarily like what we're having right now, but anytime anyone's talking about this, is that we ultimately get caught into what the ills are in this society, or what has happened here with this policy, or like taking things to like a philosophical sort of place, right? Where again, I think that where we agreed on in the beginning, where if you have a city and you have cities and towns and places that meet the basic needs and even exceed them in some measures, meet and exceed the basic needs of the people living there, then society will not collapse. You will still have incentives to do and perform and do really great things and work. But what you will get is that lessening of atomization, that increase of community that we're starting to feel gone from our cities. You'll see an increase.
I really hope we get that back. I agree.
Yeah, I think you'll get those things. I think you won't get those things by saying, okay, concentrated ownership of just a few people of these places that were all renters is the problem. So what we really need is to decentralize ownership so that we're all renting. No, because like that's that's the Incredibles. When everyone's super known will be when everyone's owning something.
I want to touch a couple pieces on that.
Doesn't have that much meaning.
One of them is, I think when people are owners, they tend to talk to each other about issues more. That's why people often want to go into little communities where they own things. I think you do find people who say,
vast different types of communities there is the density of the city. It's so many people are living so closely, and a lot of those people are not owning those things. They're renting there.
Sure.
That, what you have, to get really on the nose, you have like renters associations and tenants unions that create community there. But like for non-political things, like, what regular people are doing in their communities right now, instead of you and I, Larry, they're watching one of the wonderful playoff games happening in one of our great American/Canadian sports, if you want to call hockey, right? Like there's a lot of community that folks have,
but not the cool kids. The cool kids are watching us, Dan. The cool kids are watching us.
This is what it's really about. Truly, this is the real sports match right here.
Speaking of that, let me talk to the audience real fast, guys. If you like what you're hearing, do me a favor, click that like button. Click the button that is like. Please do so. It makes everybody happier. It's much better if you can please do so. If you're watching on YouTube, you can also super chat me. If you want to head to the front, you can. Larry Sharpe, you can super chat me if you like. If you really love me, you can always become a member. Click that join button. It's $5 a month. Please do that, because I am a proud capitalist and a rent seeker. So please do that. And please give me my $5 every month, because I'm a rent seeker and proud of it. Also, if you're watching on Twitter, please retweet this, re-X this, repost this, whatever is the thing. It's all good. I'd like you to do so, please. And do me one more favor. Please follow Dan. He's been so good to give me so much of his time to come here and have this conversation. Please give him some love back. Either follow him on Twitter at Dan from the Web, or follow him on YouTube. He does a show himself. I've seen it before. I've watched the show before. So he has other people that talk kind of trash. It's a good show. They tell jokes that I often don't get, though. That's the problem. I often don't get the jokes. Maybe because I'm too old or I'm a libertarian. I don't know. But they say things and laugh, and I'm like, I don't know why they're laughing. That does happen sometimes. I don't get those sometimes.
If ever people who like the radio show The Breakfast Club, we're that for politics. It's Power Report. We're live on Thursdays, youtube.com/Dan from Euronet, also on Twitch, also on Twitter. But no, thank you for graciously having me on. Let me know when I can respond to at least one of the comments here, because one of my friends has been saying some things.
I have tons of comments. You want me to go through them, or you want to grab a couple you want?
I want to at least hear from no sound bites allowed. We've talked in previous parts of your stream. It's like one of your friends, so fans, so I get to see them there. But yeah, no, they're similarly, I'm not getting through to them, which is totally fine. But one thing they said was 15-minute cities are prisons. Just listen to the definition and properties of each. And it's what I said earlier in the beginning. Maybe he wasn't on for this part of the stream, but 15-minute cities are a concept. It is one of many ideas of how do you plan a city around being able to work and play and live and learn and build community within the same 15 minutes. So you don't have to drive 30 minutes just to go to the grocery store, or drive 45 minutes or an hour to go to work. That is an aspiration of location. That's also an aspiration of economics, because I believe that, you have a lot of those things in New York City where, within 15 minutes, you can go to your bodega. Something's wrong with your plumbing, you can go to a hardware store, and it's all within walking distance wherever you are. Regardless of your, rich or poor, old or young, usually you have that. The issue with New York is that you can't really have any part of that be a 15-minute city because it's so unaffordable. You can't have the same
that's the hard
people.
part.
Yeah, you can't have the same people who are making lattes in that coffee shop live in that 15-minute city to enjoy the amenities of that same area. So I think that if we're going to expand the idea of 15-minute cities, it has to also be an economic aspiration too, so that it's about affordability and availability of housing. But also what I said is that I'm a lover of urbanism. I think the more people live in urban areas with cities that we can connect to public transportation and lessen our use of cars, I think that's a good thing. I'm also someone who loves cars and loves personal space. All right. So 15-minute cities aren't for everyone. They're not for me necessarily.
I think you see it in New York though, right?
Yeah, the last point is that people think that, it's like Agenda 21. They're the United Nations, the one world government is forcing everyone to live in this kind of way. And that's not the case. That's not the case. I know these people, they're nerds. They're not even trying to do that. And even the people who are advocating for it, like maybe I was just now, I'm accepting the fact that people have different lifestyles, and we want to make whatever lifestyle you choose not cost prohibitive to you, and not, just enjoyable and comfortable. Not saying you get to live in a mansion just because you want to, but you don't have to live on the street just because you're having trouble finding work, or your work that you do have that you're very good at isn't paying enough.
Here is the piece I want to bring up though, and my biggest worry. And I remember someone was telling me what they wanted to do. Was a young kid, probably she's 17, 18 at one of my events. She's like, Larry, I want to have this, and the world should be this way. And I said, it sounds amazing. I said, how do we get there from here? She said, people just have to do it. I said, what? People just have to do it. I said, but they're not gonna though. What are we gonna do? Well, they just have to. I said, you tell me you want men with guns to come in and make it happen? And she was like, well, no. I said, then we have to convince them of something, don't we? We have to show them another way, don't we? She's like, yes. And that is my entire point. If you notice, most of my ideas are trying to show people other ways of doing things. Almost always I talk about localism, talk about ownership for the individual, but I also recognize not everybody wants to own. I'm okay with that. Some people I don't want to own something. I want to pay my X dollars per month and be able to be free and not own anything. Okay, I get that too. But I think if we focus on the idea of people owning, what tends to happen, and I see this particularly when it comes to, I see it's very common when it comes to young men who first own something, like teenagers that own something. Once they start to have ownership, they think differently. They think differently. They think about how to fix things. What's next? What's the next thing? I think it engages people in general. When you own parts of everything, I feel like you're better. When you own your job, that's why I'm for worker co-ops, right? When you're part of a union where we're all together, now we own the unions, my union, right? All those things, I feel like ownership is the way to make change. And maybe I'm wrong, but I can't see another way besides violence or waiting 400 years until people figure this out. I don't want to do either of those two things.
We agree entirely. Like, I'm a very big fan of worker cooperatives. And worker cooperatives is a step ahead of unions, because unions,
Yes,
I think, is the stopgap answer. It's like, okay, we're going to exist in the system where subjugation can still happen of the rich and the landowning class and of that. And like, everyone who's renting and everyone who's working class is just trying to make, enough to appease the capitalist, but not so much that, like, they can actually get ahead, right? So I'm for ownership of, I'm for ownership in the sense of collaboration. I'm not for ownership in the sense of subjugation, right? So when I say I'm not ready for everyone to become a homeowner, if home ownership still means, okay, this piece of land has value to someone else, and by continuing to sit on it, that one day it can make me more money, sure. But I also believe that in a society that produces as much as we do, we shouldn't have to hope on, like, okay, me getting a house in Nevada, hopefully it makes $30,000 more when I sell it than not otherwise, because I think you can still get the power that ownership instills with you without having to worry about the roof over your head being a speculative asset to allow you to retire. And if you make that wrong choice, then you lose that roof over your head. So it's like, I don't want ownership of homes to get financialized, as it already has, to the point where we're back in the same position all over again. That's all I worry about. But I am not going to disagree with you that I think it's empowering when people own things in a way where it takes the power back, but not in a
yes.
way that it's taking the power away from someone.
But my feeling is, to your point, there are things like homeowner associations. There are things like that. When you have more ownership, you have more people who literally will say no to gentrification, who will be able to fight the monopolies, who will be able to change the rules to make things better for their own home. And I guess I think that's the way to go. I haven't seen, I should say, maybe I'm wrong here. I haven't seen real movement with people who don't have power at all. And I feel like ownership gives you power.
Well, here's a question, right? So
Mhm.
there's the idea of ownership, which is, a nice thing. And then there's
Mhm.
collective good, which is how cities end up being, right? So very typical situation. Los Angeles is a real thing. Los Angeles is actively trying to level up our public transportation system.
Yep.
There's a lot of issues that I've been talking about. We had some really tragic safety issues on Earth Day, actually, but we can talk about that later. I have at least like another 20, 30 minutes or so. But either ways, they're trying to expand the subway system. That means building it where it is as cheap as possible for Los Angeles County Metro to do so, while also being as least intrusive as possible, while also actually going to where people are. So it's a lot of balancing situations. There's one extension that's going to go through a completely residential neighborhood. There's already a freight train line that runs there. So what Metro is talking about doing is trenching the train. So it's technically
Okay.
underground, but like exposed underground. So it's like below street level. It's
Yep.
never going to be any crossings. There's going to be fences around it, so kids aren't going to like run in, get injured, things like that. And that's also going to extend to the freight train. The freight train is going to get safer. The train's going to have to go through or it's proposed to go through the neighborhood, but it's not going to actually have any crossings by the street. And by going through this neighborhood, it's going to be accessible to many more people and create more economic opportunity along that line than it would be if it was just running on a freight line somewhere on the outskirts of the country, of the county. The
Sure.
people who live on that land, the people who own that land, are getting together in homeowners associations, which, may be expressions of collective freedoms, may not be expressions of collective freedoms, and may be sort of repressive, depending on how you look at it. But they are getting together and they will lobby and say, we of this community do not want this trenching project to exist. We don't want the train
Sure.
to even run through here. Maybe we have logical reasons, maybe we don't, but this is how we feel. So like, how how should a government respond? I mean, like, what should a government respond to in your position? Because that seems to be like where does collective action versus private ownership, where's the rubber hit the road on that?
In my view, you always lean towards private property. Always. So if it's my property and I don't want your train here, you always lean towards me having my private property. Property rights, once you remove property rights in general, there's some exceptions, obviously, but generally speaking, once you remove property rights, people start losing their idea of ownership, right? And once you start, government never stops. One of the reasons why this happens in the first place is
it's called the right of way. It's called the right of way because that is the train line the government owns, that the county of Los Angeles owns, right? So the private property is on either side of that line, but that narrow strip of land is owned by the government, and they're saying this is what we want to do with it.
Oh, no. Then I changed. I swapped. Then my mind has changed, and that's not private property. If that's government property and they already own it, then it's how it works. Done. It goes through, of course.
But, like, there's the concept of air rights in New York, especially. Like,
sure, absolutely.
These people should have a right to say, we don't want this to go there. Much like I have a right to say, they want to build a parking lot down the street from me. I think it would do better to be a park itself where they can have green space. You can have,
in this case, here's why this doesn't work. And it's because, and this is completely, this is a little bit odd, but it comes back to it. It's because we don't have actual local democracy. That's the reason. And I see it here in New York, right? Where I live in New York, in New York City, I have no say in my government. And I'm not joking when I say I have none. Why? I'm not a member of the Democratic Party. My city is run in every way, shape, and form by the Democratic Party. Election day, November, is irrelevant. Our governor even said it openly. He said, when it was Cuomo, he said, we're going to have an election here in June to figure out who the mayor is. The election's in November. Why did he say June? That's the primary. He knows that all that matters is the Democratic Party. I'm not a member of the Democratic Party. I have no say. If we had better direct democracy, then that would change, because then those local people, what should happen, which does not happen in our current system, local people have local representatives who they lobby and go, stop it. And those people go, hey, my people said no. But we don't have that. In fact, what we have is an oligarchy. And the leaders of the Democratic, and again, I'm saying Democrat because I'm in New York City, but Republicans do it too in their areas, right?
Yeah, it's as Cornel West says, it's a duopoly.
Correct. A duopoly does it. Yes, they do it. They do whatever they want, and we have no say. So I think you're correct. What is supposed to happen to fix that, which is my plan that I want to happen, which is not happening, is easier ballot access, some form of ranked choice voting, maybe not ranked, maybe approval, some form of not first past the post voting. And if you're going to gerrymander my district, which the Supreme Court has completely screwed us over and allowed gerrymandering, you got to have open primaries. So you either got to ungerrymander or you got to have open primaries. One of the two. You have those three things. Now you have a chance at having actual democracy, and you can stop that with just by actually your vote would actually count. That would be nice.
No, I agree with all of those things. It's taking that logic of how do we decentralize political power so you don't create structures of corruption, and 100%. How do you apply that to the economic system? And so, yes, that's why I'm on your side when it comes to worker cooperatives and worker power overall, but not when that worker power can be used to subjugate others. And not really when it's worker power to subjugate others, but like when it's ownership to subjugate others. Okay, can I
grab?
Go ahead.
I was going to grab a couple other comments. Pinkerbell says, yeah, that tracks business consultant. Yeah, it does. Perfectly. Yes, I am a business consultant.
And Pinkerbell, someone in my audience, let me say, like, I was, and in different cases am, a business consultant. Like, that's a very vague thing. And, I have been a business consultant for the Majority Report even. So like, this exists in the world. Consultants can be useful. Oftentimes they get a bad rap. Oftentimes that's correct, but consultants do a lot of helpful things.
Absolutely. The anti-corporatist says there are some people on New York City who have ridiculous money. That is true. New York City has some of the largest, most wealthiest people in the country. Accurate, 100%. And most of the most wealthy people here do have multiple houses. That's true. Absolutely. But yes, also true. Yep.
Same with
So
LA. We have a really like
yeah.
a ton of, I forget the specific stat, but it's like we have one of the largest concentrations of millionaires in this country, in the country, which is, again, all you see are the videos of people who are unhoused, which I would love to, as we're sort of like, getting to the almost 2 hour mark, I would love to say like these would be my direct policy solutions for these things, and then maybe we talk about those to kind of close things out here, because
Let's do it. Do you want to cover some other comments? You said you wanted to cover some comments. Do you want to
oh
cover a
yes, yeah,
couple?
let's do some more comments. Yes, of course.
Okay. Let's see if I can grab a couple of these. Pickerbell's teasing me. She goes, "Won't somebody think of the landlords?" Yes, I do, Pickerbell. I do think of the landlords, particularly the small ones. The big ones are doing just fine, but the
big ones are the
person,
majority of landlords. We have small landlords, but I don't
yes,
think that, like that system, they're doing what happens in the system, but I don't think a system where that requires you taking money for having the land you have from other people is a sustainable system when
but
when are like out of housing.
Moen Ope, OEP, I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. Moen Ope says all landlords are bad. I disagree completely. I think the small landlord who's trying to use their property to grow and to get themselves in a better spot, I'm all on board. I see a difference. And a lot of people don't, right? A lot of people don't.
Well,
I see a difference between the size. I think, I'm going to use the joke, I think size matters.
well,
I do think size matters.
Larry, you've heard the phrase "all cops are bastards," right?
Right, I have.
Now, and you know what people mean when they say that phrase, but I'm sure we all know, or like, oh, my friend's dad is a cop, or there's this one cop who was
Yep.
really nice to me, or I've had good inspirations with cop. It's like, ACAB is an expression of a system that cops, as a definitional part of the structure of the system and what they do, are a bad aspect of the system. A lot of people do mean all cops are bastards. They do mean 1312 when they are
I
saying that,
think
but
some
that's
do
what
mean
ACAB
that.
is. Oh yeah, absolutely. But similarly to like, all landlords are bad. I did a similar thing when the Me Too movement was going on, and a lot of women were just saying, what, all men suck, or like all men suck, or
Right.
women suck, and like these are women who have boyfriends and they love their boyfriend. They post about them on Instagram all the time, and they have
Right.
good relationships with their fathers or whatever. But when you're talking about, they say, oh, it's just a few bad apples. Well, hey, yo, if all the apples were good, if there were enough good apples, right? Like we would not have this bad apple situation so often. So
I'm not saying you're
I,
wrong. I'm just
no,
saying.
I'm encouraging folks to open themselves up, that like, language is very extreme and proto-literal right now, and so people use superlatives like all and every all the time, but look for the systemic things that are coming out of that, along with the like life experiences that make people take those things to extreme literals. Because like,
Sure.
if you're a woman who has been harassed by multiple men in your life and gaslit by men, and you're saying like, hey, you know what, like all men are trash, like, and by the way, you're saying that while I know you have male friends and you're talking to me as a guy and you're saying that, I know you don't really mean that,
Right.
but I know you mean enough men are trash for me to use the A word, which is all.
Okay. Joe says there's no such thing as the illegal alien. I did not say illegal. I was just saying migrant. I use the generic term.
There was someone in chat who was saying that like, oh, by you or I or both of us using unhoused instead of homeless, or migrant or undocumented instead of illegal, we're hiding something. And it's like, no, I just like, I err towards certain forms of language because illegal has been used as a dehumanizing slur. And it's not always meant by that by people who are saying it, but it just so happens that the people who are saying it on air usually know that like that's as close as they can get without actually saying like a slur that begins with W, or a slur that begins with B, or like anything else they want to say disparagingly about people coming through the southern border. We have Canadian illegals too, but like no one wants to talk about that.
I live in New York. I'm a border state. People don't realize I am also a border state. New York does have Canadians. That's what, damn you Canadians. Absolutely, we do have that. It's true. Now, I tend to use the words that my audience will not be triggered by. Right? I tend to try to use words that are more neutral so that I get my point across. So I use migrant because it's a neutral term. And if you want to call me illegal, you can. You want to call them undocumented, you can. But I use the term migrant because it's a neutral term. Son of a Libertarian says, the National Academy of Science did the most extensive study on immigration and found that immigrants are a net positive on the U.S. economy. I 100% agree. All my point is get them out of the black market. Because to your point, Dan, I know someone else mentioned it, trafficking is a real thing. I agree with that. I'm saying get it out of the black market and you will have less and less trafficking, right? I don't know if I can stop trafficking, but I can definitely lessen it if I put more people out of the black market. That's my piece. So.
Yeah. Are there more comments?
Yeah. Joel says, the guy who cleaned up homeless camps, garbage areas, all volunteer labor and volunteer paid for trucking, no cost for the city, but the city tried to arrest him. I can't remember his name or where. That happens constantly. I cannot stand local government trying to do this. Let local people try to fix things. Joel's 100% correct. It drives me crazy.
There's some folks out in Houston whose names I'm going to try to shout out and like Google right now, but they're constantly arrested by Houston police because they're giving out food to homeless people, unhoused people, however you want to call it, right? They're constantly giving out food. And they're saying, oh, you can't do this on library property. You can't do this on city property. You can't do this on sidewalks. You can't do this when the sun is out. Like they're creating every single possible rule to make them doing this. They've given them upwards of 80 citations. I want to say it's just some ridiculous number, but they keep doing it. And that's why again, on the We the House podcast, I forget which episode on this, but they touched on the nonprofit industrial complex. And they're coming at this from even more of a lefter perspective from me. And so that's why you have private entities, which we can debate on how effective they are in, solving issues such as homelessness. You have private entities, you have government, programs like entities of the government that are created as sub branches of the federal branch. You have nonprofits, which are like these pseudo things in the middle. And then you have mutual aid. You have community on the ground organizations. And pretty much if you're not, I pretty much only trust select number of nonprofits who have lots of experience doing the work they're doing, or mutual aid, because they're on the ground and they're like, listen,
they know how it works.
Yeah, we're not taking fees or skimming on the top of this. We know what the people want. We know what the communities we're serving need. We give that to them. We're not judging them. They trust us. We're the only institution we trust because we're not any of those other institutions. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of that there.
Bad Lefty says, who have an incentive to never actually, I'm not sure who that's for. I'm not sure who that's for.
It could be about it could be about private entities not having an incentive to never fix the problem. I just think in general, you have, I think there's a number of examples, and I promise I'll keep this to 1 or 2 sentences, but I think there's a number of examples where you can disprove the idea that by simply moving something to the private sector, you get stronger results. You get more robust results.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
100%. I'm not fighting you on that. All I'm saying is you brought up the point earlier, which I completely agree with. You have to be able to create the appropriate incentive structure, or private company will just grift as much as government will grift, right? Nonprofit will grift as much as anyone else will grift. The structure is everything. My worry is government, as a general rule, cannot create that within government because government's not profit. So you can't create, generally speaking, you cannot create an incentive program that it will work. Government, generally speaking, here's what happens. I gave the government money. It didn't do the thing. What happens? I give it more money. That's how it works, right? But generally, if you have the right incentive structure, private company fails. What happens? It doesn't get money. And one example I'll give is one of my solutions to try to build out what you just talked about, because I'm a big fan of localized charities, localized non-for-profits, localized community service, is if you're in New York State, at the end of the year, you're going to write a check to the government, whatever that check is. You can take up to $250 of that, if you want that, we're going to send to the state anyway, and give it to a nonprofit in New York State. If it's within your county, it doubles to 500. And it might say $500. What's that? What if 1,000 people do it? What if 10,000 people do it? Right? It can go to a nonprofit to do whatever you think is appropriate. You think you need better healthcare, more childcare, you need cleaner streets, better parks. You pick whatever, right? Clean up the homeless shelter, whatever. You decide locally. So now I, Larry Sharpe, have to go to you and say, Dan, I got this plan. I'm going to build this thing out and you care about it. Give me your $500 that you would be sending to the state. Give it to me instead. Right? And you don't lose anything. That money, you're losing that money. The question, does it go to me or does it go to the state? If you go, Larry, I'm happy with my government, I'm going to give them the $500 and I don't trust you. Okay, you give it, but you do trust me. So you give me the $500. And now what happens if I try to build this thing and I suck and it's bad, doesn't work? I don't get the money next year. No one's going to give it to me because you're going to go, Larry, you're full of crap. You didn't do it. I'm not giving you any money. I'm going to give it to this other guy, or I'm going back to the government. I'm going to have them have the problem. It becomes a voluntary way of allowing people who don't have much to give to begin to give. And so now they get into habit of, oh, wait a minute, I can make a local person do something locally that I want, and I can make that happen. I love that concept. I think it can help to start to build out what I think are muscles that local communities haven't used. They haven't exercised. Most local communities have lost the institutional knowledge to help themselves. Am I off here?
I mean, I like the idea in theory, but I mean, just to draw it out, like, Larry, I like you and I generally think you're a good person, but let's say someone who is a little bit more nefarious, someone who we both could mutually agree on was a person we didn't like. We don't need to give them a name. We don't need to say they're a real person.
Sure.
Let's just like imagine a person, right?
Sure.
Who says, hey, you know what? I'm going to provide this service for a number of people. I'm going to fill all the potholes, right? And you know what?
Sure.
I'm going to do a good job of it. So that person actually does it successfully, and then they end up taking that $500, which I can't just tell if like everyone decides to give it to this person we all agree on we don't like but gets results, or it's the government who administers that program and then they have that.
No, it would be direct.
Okay, so like, sure, let's assume we all decide that, you know, we have some sort of subscription membership to guy we don't like but gets results. Then all of a sudden we're propping them up and they have that incentive to
fix more potholes.
No, they have that incentive to fix more potholes, but once the potholes are done and they're like, okay, well, I have so much money and I'm still in a system where money makes more money. And now I can make triple the amount of money I was making off of these petty subscriptions from this town by either expanding my business or just deciding to be evil and just do what I want to.
But that happens literally right now with taxpayer dollars, and there's no accountability. In this case that I just gave you, there is, because if you see him doing the bad thing, you go, you're not getting my money. I'm canceling my subscription.
There's totally accountability because there's laws. Right. And there's like, we have elections every 4 years and we
don't have a democracy. So the elections don't matter. The same people get elected every single time. And most of these things aren't done by elected officials. They're done by local groups that are not elected.
When we're talking about unionization efforts that are happening right now, there's definitely a difference in elections. There's definitely a difference in not just, again, presidential administrations, which I'll remind you is like the trap we didn't want people to fall down on by focusing on national politics. But there's the people who come in as part of the administrations, the appointees and the officials who are either pro-union or they're anti-union. They're either pro educational freedom or they're against educational freedom, for for-profit colleges or against for-profit colleges. Like, they have policy decisions, and that's just again still looking at the national level. When you get to the local level, that could be the difference in a more forward-thinking city policy or an idea of let me give you another example, and maybe we'll have some agreement with one of your chatters here who thinks I'm part of the New World Order, right?
I do not think you're part of the New World Order. I do not think that.
I know you don't. One of the chatters thinks so, but at least one. But there's a thing in urbanism called transit-oriented development, right? The idea that let's build housing and infrastructure, mixed-use infrastructure, so you can have commercial buildings on the bottom. You can build these things really tall, so you change the zoning and you change the density. So you can have commercial stuff on the bottom and housing on the top. This housing is located near transit stops, which are located near, major areas of commerce or, museums or areas of public interest where you have an economy and you have things going on.
Similar to what New York City has some arenas like that. New York City has some areas like that.
Yeah, they're like, development zones. I think what Trump is like the Republican style version of it. Democrats have a version style of this too. In both cases, it's usually just a racket to give to these private developers. And so like in a lot of ways, like it is what you're describing in the private sense. Like, sure, the government still has this money through taxes, or if they don't have that money, they're giving it in kind by incentivizing or removing some of the taxes by saying, hey, you're going to be spending a lot of money here, and yeah, we're going to be saying that some of these units are going to be quote unquote affordable, but if you do this, you're going to have a prime location to like have this. And then the transit oriented development people are like, hey, this is going to be perfect. You have all these transit connections. You won't need a car. You can have your 15-minute city. It's all good for you. Guess what happens? If these things do get built, the affordable units are still wildly unaffordable. Like, even in Los Angeles, you're talking like $2,000, $2,500 for a 1-bedroom or a 2-bedroom. So like a lot of families may not be able to make that work. If they is, that's just like not great family living. And two, a lot of these things aren't getting fully developed. You have the I think it's like the Ocean View Towers or like Ocean Gate Towers or something in downtown LA. That was one of these projects. It's right by the Staples Center, now called the so-called Crypto Arena, right? It's right by several metro lines and metro stations. It's in the heart of downtown, which is kind of up and coming right now. And the developers just never finished the project. It's just an unfinished blight on the city. And, graffiti artists came and they scaled the building and they started tagging it and made this whole thing. And people got all upset about it. But, it was sort of in the Los Angeles streets saying,
I
hey,
feel like
you sold part of our city off. And,
I feel like you're actually on my side here.
No, I'm saying a lot of ways they're on the same side, but we need to make sure we're prescribing the same, we're prescribing the same problem. So when we're looking at the problem, this is, liberals and conservatives in California who are saying that we can get a good deal with these real estate developers. They'll give us really important money for our campaigns, and we'll give them these really prime deals to develop. We'll say it's affordable housing. It'll all look good for everyone. And then there's no accountability. And again, these private developers aren't incentivized to build prime luxury real estate in one of the most in-demand cities for housing in the country, if not the world. If they're not incentivized for that by getting tax breaks and, the money that they will make to do that, I don't know what will, whether it's, again, a government incentive that they're not getting and they're already getting enough, or just the private benefit of there will obviously be people who buy those houses if you finish them. And again, like, even if they do buy them, they will be unaffordable. And the people who will afford it will probably use them as empty speculative assets, because that's
I see a lot of that in New York City.
Yeah. So I would say, to just end that point, like, until, I'm not saying we have to do it on like a square foot basis or whatever, but we have plenty of ability and land in this country to make sure that everyone has a roof over their heads without having to worry about, how many burgers they have to flip to keep that happening.
Roger says, Larry, I had no idea libertarians were okay with monopolies. I cannot say they believe in free market competition, then turn around and say they're okay with monopolies. Big hypocrisy. I'm saying there are some libertarians who feel like there is a perfect free market world that exists, that monopolies would never happen because somebody would always knock them over. Those are people who are, in my view, that's not who I am, but I'm saying there are libertarians who believe that there is a utopian market world where that could exist. I don't think that's true. I think I'm much more of a minarchist in that regard. I think we do need to have antitrust. I mean, maybe one day there's some time in the future where we could have a wonderful utopian world where there's no monopolies. I hope that happens one day. I can't see it, but I'm talking theoretically. If you are a theoretical libertarian, you might believe that in a theoretical world. I just want to clarify that. That's one thing I want to bring up. But most do not think that is true. Most do not want to have that kind of issue. So we are running short on, I know you see you had to run. Do you want to bring up some specifics, ideas, or do you want to go through more of these?
I'll just go through specific ideas really fast, but overall, so the way you, first of all, get a look and a real sense of crime statistics in cities and places around the country. You have some hotbeds where things are really bad. Like, I've been paying attention to Oakland, for example, in California. But on the whole, violent crimes, murders, all these other different things are going down across cities across the country. You have news outlets where this is not really meant to sound conspiratorial. This is just a fact. If the news says that, okay, well, there are 4 million people in the city who took the subway today and nothing bad happened to them, then people are not going to watch the news. If the news spends time covering
If it bleeds, it leads,
where,
right?
exactly. If they spend time covering where some person had a gun pulled on them at the subway, I believe that in that story, when it happened in New York, that happened at one of these subway stations where they have police in the station already. So let's dispel with the idea that more police in the subway solves these crime issues. But police budgets are going up in all these cities. Crime is going down in all these cities. But that's not the narrative that you see in a lot of places. So like, let's level set with what's going on in these cities to begin with. But let's make it so, listen, if you're not riding with me on housing as a human right, then let's start with transportation should be fair and accessible, meaning it should be there for people as cheaply as possible. It should connect you from places where you need to go, and it should be so accessible you don't need to plan it. It should just be there when you need it. It should be a viable alternative to having a car. Through those connections, you should be able to access centers of commerce better and live wherever you want to and have more of that flexibility and freedom. Through that, in a purely free-market way, prices of things could go down, because if there's no transportation cost for you living 50 miles outside of the city versus living 10 miles outside of the city, or if that transportation cost is not that big, then you'll consider doing that and you'll have other new centers of growth. That's how you had suburbs grow, was when you had the invention of the car and freeways, but that was a diminishing returns factor. Public transportation is a much more efficient way of doing that. When you're talking really fast, just want to like get some of these things out. When you're talking about homelessness, it's not just about giving people off the street and getting them into temporary shelter. It's getting them into medium and long-term housing, where on those sites, like you were saying, this is the part what you said, Larry, that we really agree with, is that maybe you do it by theme housing, whether it's addicts, maybe it's veterans, which still shouldn't be a thing. If anyone should get guaranteed housing, it should definitely be veterans. I think it should be everyone, but I think we should have a conversation about veterans having guaranteed housing. But you have this theme housing so that you're not only in a community, but you're in a place where you have resources and people who are willing to be case managers and willing to help people get on their feet, so that they can move from that temporary housing to their own housing they prefer in a different place, or they can stay there for as long as they need, and we can just continue to smartly meet that demand. By doing that, you will cut down on these sort of like petty theft crimes. You will improve people's quality of life. You will give people more opportunities. People will turn to crime less inherently, because I'm very much an incentives person, just as you are as well. And I think not all these incentives have to be filtered through the private sector, but they can just be filtered through quality of life and the choices that people have when they are needing things. And when people are like, oh, I don't have to run drugs or hustle or anything like that in order to have a comfortable life and make a living and do something that I enjoy that's more productive to my community, then yes, I'm going to do that, because wow, the alternative looks really dangerous and I could get arrested or worse, like die. So it's about how you get these places, and will involve some systemic changes.
That was the thing. I like the idea that you're talking about, but getting there, wow. I mean, we're nowhere near what you've just said. We're nowhere near making housing a right. We're nowhere near doing anything in the subway system that has any real value. We're nowhere near any of these things. And a couple of things if I could bring up. The crime piece. Violent crime is down from the lockdowns, but it's not down from 2019. It is not. It's about the same when it comes to violent. When it comes to nonviolent, it's way up. Petty theft and stuff is way up. In New York City, I don't know if that's true across the country. In New York City, it is way up. Petty crimes are way up. And the problem with that is it makes people feel afraid, right? If I get my chain snatched or they take my phone, were they really going to hurt me? Probably not. I mean, maybe, but probably not. But boy, does that make me feel afraid. It makes me not want to go on a subway. It makes me not want to be in the street. So we can't realistically, we want to make our people happy, just dismiss crime by saying, well, violent crime is down. We have to make people, and I'm not an Eric Adams fan at all, but I'm going to give credit where credit is due. He does say people need to also feel safe. So yes, that's.
I'm also curious how much Eric Adams talks about wage theft in the city of New York, for example, right? Because wage theft has also gone up since 2019 and has happened, quite frankly, much more again than pay. And I know you don't have to
It's true.
I'm not fighting you on this. Talk these things away, right? But like, it gets to a certain point where, again, if it bleeds, it leads. If you're talking about people not getting paid the money they're worth, for some reason, we've been conditioned to be used to private companies working outside of the government to exploit their workers and exploit the people who are around them, and then having to use the government to even get any sort of accountability for that. So it's not always like an open.
I'm not fighting on this. What I'm saying is, though, is if I'm getting, most people who have their wages stolen don't even know it's been stolen. Someone has to tell them. Most people don't even know, right? That they find out somehow. For most people some people never find out. I'm not saying you're wrong at all. I'm agreeing with you. My point is, I don't feel unsafe if my wages are being stolen, right? I don't feel unsafe. I feel unsafe if somebody grabs my necklace, if someone takes my phone. That is when
I would feel unsafe if, because your wages are stolen, you're like, one missed paycheck, one emergency away from being homeless. Right. And so then you are going to like, okay, well, there are these like idiot tourists who are always walking around with jewelry and like Chanel bags or whatever. They can buy another one if I happen to steal it and then flip it and resell it, because there are people who will do that for me and give me the money. So I'm no longer in this kind of situation, right? Like you have reasons and logic for all that. And I'm not saying all people who are living paycheck to paycheck are stealing, or all people who are unhoused are stealing, because you also never get headlines where it's like, oh, this murder was done by someone who was homed or someone who was housed.
Yeah,
right?
but hold on. But what you're doing now is saying, well, people die of cancer, and you go, well, people also die of heart attacks. It doesn't push either one of them away. They're both problems, right? But I don't want people to die of heart attacks or cancer. So I'm not saying that waste doesn't happen, or that isn't a bad thing. I'm telling you that people do feel unsafe when there is petty theft. They just do.
But you also, and I'm also saying that people just as much as they maybe feel unsafe by going outside in the subway, which again, you look at the number of, there may be that feeling versus the percentage of people who actually have something happen to them on the subway, and it's minuscule. Yeah, they go on TV and say 3.9 million people had nothing to them happen on the subway today. Then or like 3 people were in a subway car where someone was dancing, like that's not going to make it on the news, right?
So but I'm just saying people feel dismissed.
But okay, so let's grant.
So I'm saying
let's grant that people feel economic insecurity just as much, if not more so, than they feel not feeling safe walking down the street or walking down the subway. All right.
So let's handle both of them. Let's not dismiss either of them.
That's what I'm saying as well. But you have to look at how certain things are being focused on and the incentives to focus on certain things in the media or by politicians like Eric Adams, who choose to brush all these different things aside. You also have to look at someone like Eric Adams, who will, on one side of his mouth, say that New York's never been safer, and on the other side support deploying the National Guard.
I got to bring this up. Pinkerbell brings up, ask Lara how he likes the new Mayor Olay. I love Olay. I love her. I think she's amazing. I try to get her on my show. She's too cool for me to come on my show. She's too cool. She's doing all the cool stuff now. I love her. I adore her. I would have her on my show in 5 seconds. She thinks she's great. And if she were for mayor, I would totally vote for her. So she's great. I'm big fan. Big fan. I had to bring that because you brought that up. So I just wanted to bring that up. So yes.
So you can continue, but I know you asked about like, how do you get these things done? I don't want to leave that aside.
So no, I think so. I do think we do have to worry about that, right? There is a level of that. Plus, because of what we've seen, and I think you're right, it's the media. When I see someone who looks shady, right, in my view, because I saw a guy like him on TV beat somebody up, so I think now everyone who looks like him is now going to beat me up, is what I feel. And Wrong, opposite. I am aware of the facts that people who are in trouble mentally are more likely to hurt themselves than anybody else. I'm aware of that fact, but I'm going back to how people feel. And you're right. It's because the media shows a guy who looks like this kind of person did a bad thing. Now we think, oh, another guy looks like that. He must be a bad guy too. So how do we find that? We've got to find a way of helping these people and putting them in the right spot without having to arrest them always, right? Arresting isn't helping, right? Arresting is not helping. So I want to make sure I'm clear on that part. When it comes to transportation, go ahead.
Go ahead. I didn't want to cut you off. I was talking a lot, so please go ahead.
When it comes to transportation, I agree with you, but I don't think there's any real way of making it happen without bringing the private market in. I cannot see a way because every time we've tried to fix this with government, it has been a disaster every single time. It has never worked well once. My answer, which I try to bring up, which people seem to like, was to literally lease naming rights out to New York City bridges. Don't call it the George Washington Bridge, call it the Google Bridge. Don't call it the Triborough Bridge, call it the 3M Bridge. I don't care what. They will pay hundreds of millions of dollars to put their names on these damn bridges. They'll love it. It'll be on Google Maps. It'll be talked about, all the time on the traffic reports. And that money now goes to make the MTA affordable, right? Not just that, they also are responsible for maintenance. And it's a 10-year lease. You front load it, so they have to pay up front. And as long as that begins to happen, now we're good. Now, immediately get attacked. You're saying selling the bridges. I am not, Mr. Cy Bozo. You are the bozo. I said lease naming rights is what I said. So we still
Cy's
own
one
the
of my
bridges.
viewers. I love Cy.
I nobody called me a bozo, so I'm calling him a bozo back. So what I'm saying is you lease naming rights, so you still own it and you still inspect it so it stays safe. Government bridges now across New York State actually collapse. So we do see it happen. They would not collapse. Now, people always say things like, well, I don't want to have someone's name on the bridge. Well, you'd rather have a $15 toll that's being paid by the middle class and the working class? You'd rather have that? There is no other answer at this moment. If you go able to find one, I'm okay. Second, we can't use freight right now in the MTA. The tracks don't work. We can't do it. There's different type of tracks, whatever. It doesn't work right now in the New York City.
I know for a fact that isn't true. They're working on I believe it's the Interborough Express where they are going to use freight tracks on that. So like you have to do it differently and there's different considerations,
Correct.
But you can do that in any place. And it's easier to do.
You can work it. Right now we don't. At this moment in time, we have not done it. You're correct.
I think Long Island Rail and Metro North also shares a lot of at least freight corridors. Maybe not the same rails exactly.
So you could do it. And what I'm saying is I have a great idea. Allow Amazon or FedEx to build them out. They'll do it. They get freight to come in at night. Freight comes in at night into my city. I got no trucks in my city at night anymore. Less wear and tear, less noise pollution, less wear and tear on my city. More freight comes into the city, and we get to rebuild the MTA so that people get it cheap. Because I agree with you, the subway should be cheap. It is not cheap. It should be. Right now, it's a $6 billion boondoggle. We are giving it $6 billion, and it still sucks. I think we can fix it. I can't see a way without the private market getting involved with the right incentives. I just want to bring that piece up.
Yeah. To your earlier point, let's definitely come back to this transit piece because that's something I'd love to talk about. But to your earlier point about how do you get from the ideal to where we are right now?
Yes.
Yes, people feel fear for going outside and going on subways. And, there's something to be said about that. I'll tell you this. There's definitely much more of a safety feeling on the subways as more people started to use subways again after the pandemic. Agreed. Because there is some safety numbers aspect. But also to get real, there was also a certain point where people were just like, oh, if you see a black person or you see a brown person and you're both walking on the same street, just cross the streets because you can never know if you can trust them or not, right? And that was just assumed knowledge for certain people, not just white people necessarily, but that was just how people would talk about different.
It was a big thing in the Asian communities here in Queens. You're totally correct. Yes, the Asian communities were becoming almost anti-black. I agree.
And you see some extent to that as well here in California with some of the Stop Asian Hate movements turning into pro-policing movements. So that's a different thing, but it's an absolute factor that you see in a number of different places here. But that involves changing the narrative and changing the conversation through conversations like this, where a lot of folks can describe and think about and people are saying that was from the 70s. Oh no, that was the 90s, that was the 2000s, that is the 2010s, that is very much today. Whenever I travel, when I'm not on the coast, or even when I'm on the coast but in a city that's several counties away from one of the big ones, I still encounter people who are young but also learned that type of
Sure.
way of interacting with people of color. Like it's
Yeah.
they're not saying slurs at me,
My
so I can deal
father
with it.
taught me something. He always taught me, and it's going to sound kind of crazy for people who don't understand this, but you'll get this. Some people will not get this. He said, whenever you're in an elevator and you either come in or someone comes in, always say the greeting of the day. Always say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, every single time. Always say the greeting of the day whenever you meet somebody new in an elevator, every time. He taught me that, and I still do it to this day. I'm in my 50s, and I still do it to this day. I'm in an elevator, and someone says, hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I say the greeting because he told me that. He said, you do that so people won't feel scared of you.
Yeah.
And my father was born in 1939, so you know where he grew up in.
Yeah, I've heard like similar things and tones from people who were born in the 60s and the 70s who are teaching that to their kids born in the 90s and the aughts. And then
Yep.
again, those people are having kids who were born in the 80s and the 90s. And so in the aughts and the 10s and now the 20s, they're now telling their kids the same thing. So these things perpetuate and
Yep.
then come into clashing when you have conversations like this. And it's important. I like that there are people who are having their ideas challenged in different ways here, whether it strengthens their resolve or not. Like
Sure.
you start to change minds and change ideas through this, because there are fewer people talking about crime in the context of we are afraid of a lot of things, and the probability of these things may be happening or maybe not happening, but we view a lot of these fears with different levels of fear. Like, let's talk about that. Let's actually get into that dialogue. Let's have that conversation. Right. I think we're all smart enough to do that. Like, all these things require moments of change. There was one moment where we were like, actually, if you didn't make smart financial decisions when you were in your 20s and 30s, if you make it to live to your 60s and you end up being broke and surviving off of cat food, I'm sorry, that's capitalism, baby. We decided at one point, no, that's not capitalism. We're doing Social Security. So it takes a little bit of time to get people to, be convinced of these big policy changes, but you do it.
Did old people not starve to death when it wasn't capitalism?
I don't get the framing of your question. I'm saying that people who are
old people, if you're an old person and you made bad decisions in your 20s and 30s and you're surviving on cat food, that means it's capitalism. I'm saying there are tons of older people in all types of countries who made whatever decisions, good or bad, and still wind up suffering or being poor in their 60s, whether their system is capitalism or not.
Sorry, I was being glib when I was saying that's capitalism. I was saying more like America and a lot of other European countries used to be a place where there was no social safety net for people who are retired.
Okay. Yes. Understood. Okay.
Yes.
You're saying that there's a value for a social safety net.
Yes, there's a value for a social safety net that wasn't built in for people. There was over time enough people's, relatives had to, I laugh kind of glibly here, but like enough people's relatives had to suffer in old age because they weren't able to constantly work in old age. And we decided, hey, you know what? You shouldn't have to work in your old age. If you spent your entire life working, you should get to relax and not worry about most of your bills, and like maybe take a vacation here or there. And like you just said, we have a bunch of social safety nets around the country and in the United States that are woefully not performing as well 100%. As they should, because most of them haven't been touched since they were incepted maybe 70 or 80 years ago, and they need fixes to our modern economy. But guess what?
But we don't have to add something to this, though. Dan, we've got to add something to this.
We don't have less money like now than we did 7 or 80 years ago when these programs.
No, we're spending far more money. We are spending far more money and getting far worse results. I think the answer here is that we got rid, when we added a government, initially, there was still a community answer, and government could supplement a community answer, which I think is a much better plan. Now we've made it to where all of a sudden there's almost no community answer. It's like only government. And that is my problem. Government, I always say this, whenever someone's in trouble, whatever that is, financial trouble, mental trouble, whatever it is, the first thing you need before the appropriate doctor or hospital or whatever is somebody who cares. That's the first step. I care. Okay, let's get you the help you need, whatever that help is. And I feel like when we added government, we almost destroyed the community over time. I think we need more community to be involved to supplement government now, because now it's a government answer has failed constantly. It does not work on its own. All a government answer will do is just write you a check. That's all it will do. We have to have a community also.
I think the literature and, history will prove this, that the separation from communities, that there's people say, oh, it's secularism and it's atheists and it's liberals because we used to all have churches and now we don't. Like, there's narratives
probably more the phone than anything else.
I mean, there's the phone, but there's also TV, right? Like, there's the only people who are watching TV are people who are like boomers or Gen X or like later, right? Because that was the thing they grew up with. And, the generation before that, they were really had radio was their comfort thing. Now for us, it's phones, and the generation after that, God knows what. But I think.
Hold on. Liberty Twitcher says, but isn't government the community? I would argue 100% no. Our current government is an aristocracy. That's what our current government is. It is an aristocracy that is not helping us at all. Community is the people around your neighborhood.
So what I
was
saying was that when you look at what the literature says, what the historical record says about that time, is that when you got people into government who started a regime of deregulation and really perpetuated it, was also when you saw a rhetoric and a politics of individualism. That individualism came in the form of not worker cooperatives like you were describing, but small businesses that were still created within the structures of there was someone at the top somewhere, and you can just work with your friend who also has a small business, and you can have an incentive to do deals with each other, and you have a tax structure that encourages you doing deals with each other. You got that version because it was built within this structure and aided by the government, as opposed to a version that was, okay, we're going to give all those incentives, but you do it as a worker cooperative and not as a small business whose incentive is to become a big business, whose incentive is to eat up all of your competition in pursuit of relentless growth. That is the kind of dichotomy that I think continues to separate the leftist sort of antidote and diagnosis of these things versus a let's continue to privatize things, because the private sector will rarely, if ever, resort towards worker co-ops because they're inherently democratic. It's an inherently democratic structure.
Yes. However, what if you were to create the right incentive, as I mentioned before, right? As example, another policy that a policy idea I had for New York State. And again, it's a way of getting people to change how they think. Right now, the average person in New York State thinks a worker co-op is a disaster. They don't believe in them at all. They think they're dumb. They're never going to work. Most bankers think they can't invest in them. I don't have control over the CEO. There's no value. Most think that's not really an issue whatsoever. But what if you were instead to say, hey, if your company's going under, or you're going to sell your company's going under, you're going bankrupt, there's going to be a 60-day waiting period where the vultures can't come in. And we're going to allow the workers, if they want to buy. Now, of course, the first thing is, well, how do the workers get the money? Well, two things. One, the workers in most states, I know New York State, are going to get at least 6 months of unemployment. We'll give you all the money up front. That's the first thing. Government gives all the money up front. Second, you allow for either public banks or more localized credit unions that are basically co-op banking to be able to say, look, if you decide to support someone who is doing this, some group of people who do this, the government will act as the FDIC. So you go ahead and do it, act as an FDIC to allow people to voluntarily buy these companies who are going out of business. Now, most people will tell me one or two things. Larry, that rarely ever happens. It actually happens a lot. Larry, that isn't good enough. Yes, it is, because once that begins to happen, people will see co-ops as viable business models. And then that will change the culture. And they'll go, oh, wait a minute, that restaurant's run by as a co-op? Yeah. I thought I was only for those crazy hippies who own farms, which is what most people still think to this day. So if you say, oh wow, that hardware store that's run by a co-op, yeah, it is. Oh my God, things will change. I think policies like this are the way to get there. I asked you to get there. That's how I get there. I get there by doing those small incremental steps to get culture to change.
Yeah, I think I'm all for incremental change when it makes sense and when you're doing a good analysis of like, okay, is this incremental change coming at the cost of something we're doing later? And I think that you can do incremental change in the right direction. The incremental changes I'm talking about are, we don't have transit um connections right now, but you can start. Places that don't have trains can have rapid bus lines. They can have bike lanes. They can promote, infrastructure for people who don't use cars to be able to get around. You can zone things better so you can have more flexibility for economic opportunity and what communities want on a basis. Maybe a community really wants a coffee shop, but then people move in and they want it to be a wine bar. Like, let that flexibility happen a lot faster with less gridlock. There's so many different things. Then with these,
but hold on, what you're saying is actually happening right now in New York City. What you're saying is happening. What you're saying is actually happening. And it's happening very poorly. And it's making people still hate the city and leave. It is not doing well.
I don't think you can say that.
Why? Hold on. Let me give you the reason why I think it's the reason why. I'm not saying what you're saying is wrong. I'm not. What I'm saying is it's being run by our terrible, broken, monopoly, corrupt government that is New York City. And they're just giving it as gifts to grifting people. It doesn't go well at all. And that's why it doesn't work the way it's supposed to work at all. And we're still losing 300,000 people per year out of the state, about 100,000 per year out of the city. They're running away as fast as they can. And they're unhappy. You see it. And they're unhappy.
I don't think you can say universally that things aren't going well, because I think people generally like the biking improvements that are being made to New York City. I think people generally like the bus lanes and the fact that certain buses through Brooklyn and Queens and crossing Manhattan are now much more efficient because you have those dedicated bus lanes. I'm not a full fan of how the congestion pricing is going out, and I think that needs to be done a lot more equitably. Like for that, but other places, like throughout Europe, throughout South America, have done similar things to great effect. They have made their cities more walkable, much more safe, because we know that car accidents happen way too often within New York City because you have so many people and so many cars all rushing, trying to move together. Controlling that somehow works. I'm not saying it's being done very well, and
it isn't. It isn't being done well in London. It's not being done well in Amsterdam. It's not being done well in these are big cities, and it's not being done well in big. If you have newer cities, it can work.
I'm refuting what you're saying because aspects of it are working well. The bus lane thing is working better than not. The congestion pricing thing is a step in the right direction. We're talking ultimately about what we were just talking about a few moments ago, which is that conversation of, are we making these incremental changes? Are we taking 3 steps forward, 1 step back, or are we taking 2 steps forward, 3 steps back? Like, are we ultimately moving forward or moving backward with these incremental changes? And at what point is it time to go beyond incremental? And how you go beyond incremental means getting buy-in from folks and having conversations like this where we're able to convince people of why taking a few 5-10 steps forward isn't so much of a big leap as people think. It's not, collectivism or communism or other scary loaded terms. It's, oh wow, I can afford to live someplace cheaper and it doesn't cost me more time or more money to get to where all the jobs are. And in fact, more of the jobs are coming.
That's what people are doing, right? The reason why I would say it's not working is because people are leaving. And if you look at any polling, people in New York City are unhappier now than they were before the lockdowns, right? I get through the lockdowns. I totally get that. That was terrible. Prior to the lockdowns, they are unhappier now than prior to the lockdowns.
Why are they unhappy? Like what are they unhappy about though? Because again, like if it's about like cost of living issues and
of course
Yeah, of course, the cost of living issues, those are happening everywhere. All the places that people are fleeing to, like Florida and Texas, are now seeing those same issues because that's an issue of an economy, frankly, of an economy where you have an issue of too many people trying to live in one place where there isn't enough housing, driving
Yep.
up all the prices. You and in New York, you have Long Island Rail, you have MTA, you have Path, you have these other systems to get people in and out of some suburbs, but you have many other policies from politicians and also private interests who are making it tougher to ultimately work out. Well, one good point you were saying though is that the big news in California on transit rides right now is that we're getting a high-speed rail line from not the big high-speed rail line that's been talked about for
Yeah, I
my
remember that.
entire
Yes.
lifetime, been a disaster, but one that's going from San Bernardino, so in Southern California, kind of more inland, to Las Vegas in about 2 hours, which would usually be a 4-hour trip.
Wow.
And then from San Bernardino, there's an existing commuter rail train that'll get you to downtown Los Angeles in about 45 minutes to an hour. So that's being done through a private partnership.
Yep.
Brightline, the same company that made the high speed rail in Florida, quote unquote, because it's still not as fast as the European Asian counterparts. But that's like happening through private entity, and that's happening way faster than the California state government's high speed rail
Yep.
project. But again, like,
Absolutely.
there's government incompetence. There's also the fact that there's nowhere else in the United States that has built high-speed rail until very recently, where you've had places like Brightline. So you just haven't had a lot of experts being able to come in and drive down prices and drive down costs, because you're basically reinventing the wheel here. So I encourage people to take like a larger analysis of, yes, very obvious political failure and mishandling,
Yep.
and going through multiple administrations who wanted, if you go through an administration who doesn't want to go through a project and they slow that project down, and then you go through another administration who wants to start that project back up again, because of the system where people can't just stay on a project because they care about it, but they have to find a job. Now you have to find new people to relearn not just how to do this new thing, but how to pick off where someone else who was learning it for the first time left off. Like,
Or you could just have professionals just build the damn thing.
the professionals aren't in the United States. And this goes to a conversation we had earlier about, like, how can we do smarter things?
Exactly what I just said. Here's what I'm telling you. If you said to some private company that builds these things, and that's what's happening in California right now, hey, you have to build this thing. And they'd say, yeah, we're going to build it. Well, the people that you need are in whatever, Germany, Japan. Great, we'll get them over here. If they controlled what I'm talking about, if they controlled the visas, they'd be here. And that is my point again. With the right incentives, we can make it. Before we go further, I do want to talk to my audience real fast. Audience, we have given you amazing content that you cannot see anyplace else. There's no way you will see people like this, talking like this, about this, and be two people of color. You will never see this anyplace but here, which means I deserve for you to click the button that is like. Do that. Click that button. I deserve it. Please do so. Dan deserves it too. So just do it. Click the button. In fact, if you don't click the button, you're telling, I'm taking that as you hate Dan. That's how I'm taking it. If you don't do it, you hate him.
If you don't click the button, you're taking it as private corporations can issue visas for governments, which is
That's correct. Yes.
No.
If you don't do that, you are agreeing that private organizations should issue visas like government. That's what you do if you don't hit that like button. Exactly correct. Thank you, Dan. Exactly right. If you're watching on Twitter, please retweet this now or re-exit, whatever the case may be. You can always super chat me to support the show if you're watching on YouTube. And I am a happy rent seeker, so please click that join button if you are on YouTube. I don't have a problem with that at all. I am libertarian, so I don't mind one single bit. $4.99 per month does help me to keep doing more of this. And less of that evil business consulting that Pinky hates so much. I'll stop doing that. Just do this instead. Now stop being that. See? You can win. We all win here, Pinky. We all win. It's how that works. But no matter what, please support this man who's given us so much great content. Follow him on Twitter if you want, or on X at Dan from the web, or follow his YouTube channel. He puts out great content. YouTube.com/Dan from the internet. All of his stuff is on the show description on Facebook and also on YouTube. So, Dan, how do we want to wrap this up? What do you think we want to do? How do we wrap this up? Do you want to go through some comments? You want to say something? You want to have something cool?
I have a couple of comments, and then I can wrap. I guess I'll do the comments first.
Bad Lefty says, Larry, can we fix him? Chat. I like that. Can you fix me? Thank you, Bad Lefty. I am moved.
I'll do my summary portion there before we go on to like I guess the more combative comments. Is that like I appreciate talking to you because I don't think, you know, just as I'm not a perfect representative of every person on the left, there are people to the right of me, there are people to the left of me, but they still call themselves leftists or socialists or democratic socialists or whatever these terms are. You don't represent every sort of libertarian, but I appreciate that very often we can come towards similar policy goals and you know, even similar ways to get there, because we both care about incentive structures and what makes people more likely to do a thing versus, you know, creating laws or, you know, other things like that to barriers that could potentially get in the way with that. We usually agree with these things. It's where we trust power to be best implemented, and we've both been burned by governments and corporations, so we have like very particular opinions about that. But you know, I think more often than not we agree on these things, and it would be much better if, you know, via ranked choice voting, as you mentioned, via, you know, just a broader education around the history of these terms and, you know, is it collectivism to just like have communities, or like is it communism to just to say that people deserve a bare minimum of things? Like we have there's so much stuff, but it's like, is it communist to say that we all deserve clean air? Shouldn't people just like, if you can afford clean air, you can have it. If you can't afford clean air, well, it's still air. It's perfectly fine. You can just don't like, you can take communism and collectivism to such extremes if you want to, right? But at the end of the day, the terms don't matter. I think our policy goals are very close. We just have differences on who we trust to be the Goliaths to open the floodgates for the Davids. And I look forward to having many more conversations where we, you know, figure out where we lay that trust. But you know, I think the answer will be something involving co-ops. I think that's where we can start to make some inroads there.
I am, as you know, I am all about ownership in general, and I want to bring up a couple of one comment that I wanted to bring up, if I could, maybe two. It's from Pinkerbell. She says, "Wow, that really annoyed you." Pinkerbell, not at all. Not even close. I'm happy that you're here. I'm happy that you're paying attention. I'm happy that that you're open-minded enough to hear me rant, that you actually just and just walk away from me. So no, if that's yes, I will take what I can get. Not unhappy at all. I hope you watch another one of my shows. I hope you do. I hope you do. So yes, not upset at all. Also, and she also goes on to ask, Larry, how would people who aren't useful to a capitalist be treated in your corporate controlled visa system? The issue would be is anybody who wants to come can come as long as someone wants them, whoever that person is, right? So would people who aren't useful to a capitalist, would they come? In my world, right? It's anyone could get them to come in. In other words, if I have a wife or a child that I want to bring, an elderly person, I can still pay to have them come in. The corporate, I'm paying the corporations to get the visa, right? So it doesn't really matter. They would do it quickly and fast anyway. But not just that. It doesn't end the government. The government can still bring people in. This would be a secondary system. I don't like monopolies. I like decentralized. You could still go through the normal government if you wanted to, or I could pay, or whatever the case may be, for a privatized system. I could personally pay for my family member, someone I love, or a corporation could pay because they want the person to work. That is how it would work in my perfect world. Hope I answered your question. So I just want to make sure that was clear.
I don't want to belabor the point, but I'll just say I disagree with a lot of that framing just because of the reasons to why people are immigrating to America specifically. And that if we broaden out to hey, if you have a friend who vouches for you to come in, we have that now same structure that we've created, that we have right now, where people are selling basically human trafficking of themselves on the black market, and you're getting into like, you know, dangerous situations there. So
do you hold on, you think that people would use this almost to create like a indentured servitude world? Is that the concept, like that?
If you create an incentive structure to where people can make money off of like, you know, per immigrant they connect to a job, then yeah, you're potentially creating that possibility to happen. But more specifically talking about was that people pay, you know, coyotes an amount of money
Yes.
to get them from country to country and not be detected, to get into the United States and get settled, find a place to live, find a temporary job, shelter, housing, etc. Right? Like, I think, instead of just saying like, okay, well, let's have private corporations make immigration to this country easier. I'm like, well, again, we don't hire Boeing to secure our borders, at least not explicitly. So
We
let's just
do. That's fine.
I know that's why I said at least not explicitly, right?
Exactly.
But
yes.
like I could go down the list. We technically don't hire Microsoft to do, but we do. Which is again, it's like I don't trust this facial recognition or predictive technology, whatever. But you can still, like, if we're talking about reforming immigration, let's just reform immigration, right? Like, let's just go to the government and we're changing the rules, we're adjusting how this works, how this is fixed.
I'd be okay with that. And the guy running for president as Libertarian right now is a guy named Lars Mapstead. He actually wants to do that. He literally wants to just make it easier. If I thought we could do it, I'm in. I'm trying to find an incremental way to move things in the right direction.
That is a matter of political will, because if the leading Republican or the leading Democrat, which might happen to be Joe Biden or Donald Trump, went whole hog, or better yet, both of them went whole hog into open migration, then we'd have it, right? It's not that there's something structurally in the way. It is political will by the same two-party duopoly that has made everything else difficult for us.
Roger's mad at us. He says, "You are not of color. You are black. We must own it unforgivably." Well, I got to tell you, Roger, I said that because, again, I try to use generic terms, make everybody happy. But to your point, I go by black. I'm old enough to remember Negro. I'm old enough to remember that. That's how old I am. My father would have been happy to be called Negro. He'd have been happy to be called that. Happy to be called that. So I go by black. I prefer black, but I know some people don't. So I was using a more generic term. Dan, do you care either way?
I use both interchangeably. I mean, I'm personally mixed, so I am predominantly black and I'm mostly black, but I have other
cultures. As am I,
clearly. Yes, right. It's like I have other cultures in my background, and so I give speech to that. But also, I think that more often than not, especially in the context of America, people of color, whether that be black, and there are people who say, "Don't call me black, I'm African," or African American. Yeah. So it gets what I think that the more you get into these sub labels, the more you lose sight of the fact that there's much to be shared in a human experience and an American, working class coming to American style experience. So much like we use inclusive language to not accidentally incur that things are only for men or only for women or only for people who follow a gender binary. It's a very simple thing. I do it interchangeably, and it tends to be the people who yell about others using this language who police this language the most. So I'm just like, I don't care.
There we go. All right, guys. Well, anything else before we wrap this up?
There was one. I don't need to bicker with your audience, but it's fun. I like it sometimes.
Bicker, do it. I don't mind.
Liberty Twitcher said, "It's your guest who favors lowering education standards. So of course we don't have talent anymore. He opposes meritocracy." And here's what I want to try to a seed I want to plant with other folks in your audience, right?
Oh, I like this one. Go ahead. Yeah, beat him up.
You can. As I've said here, and in fact, in moments here, Larry has made the same point. You will still have people working to do better at things and to be good at things, right? If you are not hanging survival over their head, all right? Like threatening homelessness on someone, or threatening to take away someone's rights, or threatening to take away someone's money does not make them a better barber. Or it doesn't make them a better fisher. It doesn't make them a better coder. In fact, it takes away time they could spend owning their craft. It takes away time they could spend making their own things. I'm also not saying give everyone a mansion. I'm saying I think everyone deserves a roof over their heads that isn't constantly leaking and having plumbing or electrical issues, where they can get, basic amenities should they want one. Let's throw in a microwave.
But let's go to meritocracy for a moment, right?
Let me get straight to the point. I do oppose meritocracy. I do oppose meritocracy. I don't believe that this idea. I believe that meritocracy in America is a myth, and I don't believe that you get better results just by creating harshness and tension, and that you can create a standardized test that shows you who's the smartest. Absolute nonsense.
So I think the standardized test piece you and I would agree upon. I don't think they're very valuable in that regard. But I think a meritocracy is insanely important. I think exactly the opposite. I feel like a meritocracy is the way that people very often gain what they want, which is that social status, that social dopamine hit, that thing that makes them want to do better and be more. I want to be the guy who gets the medal, or I got the first place, or right, I got the certificate, or I got the thing, right? I got the thing, I feel better, I want to keep going. Don't we hurt the human spirit if we end meritocracy?
I don't think you can end meritocracy in the sense that for all of our fine normal folks who are watching the NBA playoffs and NHL playoffs after you watch this, right?
Perfect example.
But there's controversies about, oh well, if the women in the WNBA want to be paid more money, they should get more people to watch the games, right? Well, guess what?
Sure.
The women in the WNBA aren't playing for money. They're playing for the competition. They're playing for that sport. They're playing, even though when you're in the minor leagues and when you're in a lot of women's leagues, you're not making all that much money. There's still people who want the gold medal, and there's people who are like, okay, well, I'm going to get the silver medal then. You're not going to kill meritocracy by being real with how unreal it is in our economics, right? Because
so hold on, let me be clear. So you're saying meritocracy as far as cash, but not meritocracy. You brought up the testing. So I didn't take it as cash.
So the commenter said, he's alleging that I favor lowering education standards so that we don't have the talent anymore and we oppose meritocracy. No, that's not true. Like, Boeing, there's some people that are saying that Boeing was doing too much diversity, equity, inclusion. And so because of that, their planes are falling apart. And it's like, no, Boeing is not checking, like they're not doing quality assurance. They've been lackluster with oversight, and so that's why their planes are falling apart. And they may or may not be killing their whistleblowers. That's a different podcast, right? But you of course test people and train people for things that are really important, like brain surgery, being a pilot, like these really important things. Naturally, like that's not meritocracy. That's just like, if you're playing a sport, we're going to teach you the rules of the sport. We're going to teach you how to dribble the basketball or move the puck or whatever. And you're going to practice it a lot if you're going to be playing at a high caliber level. Of course, you don't oppose meritocracy.
Isn't a meritocracy literally when the guys win the playoffs? Isn't that a meritocracy? When I get promoted at Boeing and to be a manager or whatever, however they work, when I get promoted, isn't that meritocracy? Or should it only be, I've been playing basketball for 5 years, so I'm now the team captain?
No, the question is not, was the time you put in or moving up the ladder, was that not right? Like, the idea is let's make sure we're defining meritocracy correctly, because some people will say that Elon Musk is the best or Jeff Bezos is the best because they're the smartest and they're number one and they have the most money and therefore meritocracy. And that's the kind of thing that I'm against, because I think you can look at both of them. Bezos might be a harder case. Elon Musk is a target rich environment of like, you can just, fail upwards and manage to fail upwards. And there are just certain like elite hacks to do that. Right. I'm fine with structures as they might exist, especially in competitions for sports and things like that. I'm not okay with when structures are used for subjugation. I'm not okay when ownership, for example, is used for subjugation. And so if you work really hard at a job and you're really good at it and you get promoted to be a manager or something, and that comes with like, a pay bonus, that's great. I just don't want that pay bonus to mean that like, oh, the company makes less money now, so they have to fire 2 of the junior employees. And you know what? If a company has to make that decision, I'm almost okay with that, so long as you're living in a society to where those junior employees are not going homeless or not like starving for food because they no longer have jobs. Because right now, having a home and
Then-
having health insurance is tied to your employment.
So let me ask the crazy question here then. Why wouldn't you, from what you just told me, it seems to me that you'd be happy with a system that was, for example, UBI and then meritocracy. So everyone has enough money, they don't starve, they get healthcare, whatever, right? Whatever that number is, and then meritocracy. Am I wrong? Would that not be a good world for you?
Sure, yeah. As long as people can, as long as losing quote unquote meritocracy doesn't mean that you are, without all resources and you're treated as a second class citizen.
So what I actually
if you want
hear
promotions,
is,
yeah, go ahead.
you're not actually against meritocracy. You're against people suffering from a meritocracy.
Correct.
Oh, okay. That makes sense to me. Okay, I get it. Okay.
And it's the same thing.
Took me
It's the
some
same
time
thing.
to get it. Okay.
Exactly why I like these conversations. And again, I'm not against ownership. I like the nice things that I own. There's the joke about Hassan Piker, like, oh, you're a socialist? Well, you bought a $1 million house in West Hollywood. It's like, no. Believing that other people should have a standard of living does not mean that I do not want to have a standard of living. That does not mean that if I am so blessed through my work or achievements or luck to be able to afford a nicer than standard thing, that goddamn it, I can have that too, right? Like, this is not to say those things. It's just to actually have a rising tide lift all boats versus people pulling up ladders as quickly as they can as they try to build their own ladders. I have seen a lot of that. Upwards. Yeah,
I've seen a lot of that.
That's what I'm always trying to get against. So it goes back to ACAB. We're not trying to be so extreme here by saying like, oh, all ownership is bad, or like, but we're really trying to attack these structures and get people to question like, well, what do you mean by that? Like, what do you mean by ownership is bad? It's like, no, ownership when it comes to subjugation, if me having a nice computer to stream from means that some kid somewhere doesn't get a computer to learn in school, then that's bad. We don't live in that world right now because me buying a nice streaming computer does not prevent some kid from buying a cheaper computer to learn and do homework on. So like that type of ownership is fine. It's when ownership starts to break into limited goods that the public should be able to enjoy that I start to get annoyed with it. Own beachfront property. It's when we make all the beachfront property private and like regular people need to own beachfront property in order to enjoy the beach. So I'm like, hey, now let's balance this out a little bit.
Okay, guys, we went longer than we were supposed to go. We did. Yeah, it's Dan's fault. I'm blaming him. It's totally his fault. He did it all.
Every show I guest on and every show I host ends up going long because I keep yapping. I just love yapping. It's my thing.
It's Dan's fault. But click the like button tomorrow on and then I will forgive him. If you click the like button, I will forgive him. Please do that. If you're watching on Twitter, please make sure that you retweet this. If you are not a member, become one. I am a rent seeker. Join, please. $4.99 per month is what I want. And of course, please support Dan. He's been so good sitting here for almost 3 hours. So support him on YouTube at youtube.com/Dan from the internet or on Twitter or X at Dan from the web. Guys, we'll say thank you so much for this evening. I appreciate all the time that you gave me. I will see you all very soon. Oh, by the way, but before you go, please, after this is over, do me a favor. Go back to wherever you are watching it and put a comment. Put a comment after it's over because you know who likes that? Al Gore Rhythm. Al Gore Rhythm likes that very much. So please do that. I was
here for you with 2 hours. I'll do it again, Larry. I'll do it again.
There we go. He will punish us again. He will.